Chapter 339. In this season, the weather in the northern frontier was changeable. During the day, the sun was scorching hot, but at night, it was drizzling. Lightning flashed in the sky, and thunder rolled between the clouds. It seemed that the real storm was yet to come. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the wilderness and Lucian, who was running for his life. This peak warrior was in a sorry state. His hair was disheveled, his clothes were disheveled, and there was a dagger in his chest. Fresh blood stained his body, but he did not know how much of it was his own, and how much belonged to someone else. Although he had escaped Swan City, Lucian knew that he was not out of danger yet. He could vaguely feel that someone was staring at him. However, when he looked around, he couldn't find the source of this gaze. The rain was getting heavier, and Lucian could feel his strength draining away along with the wound on his chest. He was like a wounded beast, running for his life under the watchful eyes of a hunter. Hunters were very patient. They hid in the dark, waiting for the beast to weaken before striking the fatal blow. I can't just sit here and wait for my death. Lucian made up his mind. He dismounted from his horse and stabbed the horse's butt with his sword. Under the pain, the warhorse galloped even faster. Lucian hid in the bushes beside the road, holding his breath and waiting for the pursuers behind him. He was ready to fight back. Time passed little by little, but the expected pursuers still did not appear. Silver snakes danced in the sky, and a downpour followed. Even with Lucian's temperament as a peak warrior, he could not help but doubt his judgment. Could it be that there were no pursuers? Colin and Count Schultz let him go just like that? If that was the case. Lucian's eyes flashed with anger. He would not rest until he had his revenge. Just as Lucian was about to give up on the ambush and turn to leave, a ray of light seemed to appear in the darkness. "Who's there?" Lucian stopped and asked in a low voice. Darkness shrouded the land. Apart from the wind and rain, there was only silence. But not long after, the mud on the ground suddenly trembled slightly, and even the pebbles in the mud jumped up. A thunderous sound rang out in the distance, and in the blink of an eye, it became deafening, as if thousands of soldiers and horses had come out of the storm. This kind of aura seemed to have overshadowed the divine might of lightning. Lucian narrowed his eyes and looked at the group of cavalrymen who suddenly appeared not far away like a demon god. The 200 or so cavalrymen created a long tunnel in the dense rainwater. With the momentum of tearing the rain apart, the cavalry rushed toward Lucian. Lucian stood still, facing the cavalry squad that was charging at him as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. His face was still calm. Instead, he gripped the broadsword in his hand with both hands and waited for the incoming attack. Clang! However, when the cavalry was 500 steps away from Lucian, they suddenly dispersed. Just as Lucian was puzzled, hundreds of arrows twisted in the rain like poisonous snakes, broke through the rain, and flew directly toward him. Facing the threat of the arrow rain, Lucian's eyes focused. The broadsword in his hand flashed, and the shadow of the sword opened up in front of him like a shield. After a series of clanging sounds, this round of arrow rain was all blocked. Before Lucian could catch his breath, 3 armored cavalrymen rushed toward him like tanks. Poochie! With a slash of the sword, the fierce sword light suddenly exploded. Broken limbs, blood, and internal organs flew everywhere in the rain. This slash seemed to have changed the color of heaven and earth. Lucian was like a demon god who had come to destroy the world, destroying everything. However, his arrogant attitude did not last long, and he felt pain in his ankle. Looking down, Lucian realized that one of the 3 cavalrymen was still alive. But this person's body had been cut in two, and he was still able to swing the sword in his hand and stab Lucian's ankle. Bam! Lucian kicked out and the man's head exploded. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, another rain of arrows swept toward him. Lucian swung his sword again to block. After the rain of arrows, another 3 armored cavalrymen charged at him. Lucien realized that the enemy wanted to use this method to exhaust his strength. However, he did not have a good way to break it, because he had found that although the number of cavalrymen besieging him was not large, they were all professionals. Lucien guessed that these people should be the Angeli family's men of sacrifice, but he did not expect that such a family that had just risen for less than 2 years would have so many professionals. Moreover, he also found that these cavalrymen were really fearless of death. Some of them were seriously injured, and even cut in two, but they still wanted to finish off Lucien. This kind of desperation made even Lucien feel a chill down his spine. After several rounds of arrows and the desperate charge of the cavalrymen, Lucien's strength was falling short of his desire, and several wounds had appeared on his body. A grade 6 warrior was not a god. First, he was ambushed by Colin, his chest was heavily injured, and then he fought his way out of Swan City. Now, under the repeated attacks of this group of fearless cavalrymen, he was at the end of his rope. Viscount Angeli. Lucien finally could not help but shout, "There is no unresolvable hatred between us, why do you have to threaten me with death?" Unfortunately, the only response he received was another round of arrows. Then, a huge armored man holding a huge shield and a spear charged at Lucien like a violent bear. His heavy footsteps caused the earth to tremble. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Although there was only one person charging this time, and he did not have a horse, Lucien was facing a great enemy, and his expression became more serious than ever. Boom! The two collided head-on, and for a moment, the wind blew and the sound was ear-piercing. The rain that filled the sky suddenly exploded, and circles of water ripples suddenly bloomed like flowers in full bloom. A grade 5 troll warrior. The moment they clashed, Lucien discovered the identity of his opponent. Before he could figure out how Colin had sent a high-level troll warrior to kill him, there was a sudden commotion in the bushes. Lucien sensed danger and roared, the combat energy all over his body surging like flames. The air made a crisp sound like glass being broken, and the rain that filled the sky turned into countless fine lines, exploding in all directions. At this moment, a short armored man hiding in the bushes burst out, and the rain that filled the sky was like fine needles, instantly piercing his armor into a sieve. However, the armored man did not seem to feel anything, and continued to swing the huge hammer in his hand, smashing it at Lucien. Boom! Under the hammer, the ground splashed like water. Lucien spat out blood, and his sword-wielding hands could not help but tremble. A grade 5 dwarf warrior. Lucien was convinced that this was not a power that the Angeli family could have. Only the House of St. Hilda, the master of the northern frontier, could have such strength. So, Lucien shouted again, "I surrender. Honorable master of the northern frontier, as long as you are willing to give me a way out, I am willing to swear allegiance to you." Swish! Swish! A dense rain of arrows interrupted Lucien's pleas for mercy. What chilled him even more was that the rain of arrows also covered the two armored men, one big and one small, as if these enemies did not care about the lives of their companions at all. And the two armored men did not seem to care about their own lives either. They ignored the rain of arrows and rushed at Lucien again. "Are you crazy?" Lucien's face turned green. In his life, he had experienced countless battles, big and small, and faced countless cruel and cunning enemies, but he had never seen such a strange way of fighting. The enemies in front of him seemed to be emotionless, painless, and unconscious killing machines. They were not afraid of death at all, and they only wanted to achieve one goal at all costs. Kill Lucien. Chapter 340. Boom! A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, tearing a gap in the darkness that shrouded the earth. Under the lightning, Lucien's veins bulged all over his body. He held his broadsword firmly in front of him and arched his body to withstand the tremendous strength of the two armored men. The three of them were full of arrows, like 3 hedgehogs. Lucien's face was frighteningly pale. However, what made him even more desperate was that the two armored men opposite him were not weakened at all. It was as if the arrows in their bodies did not exist at all. The surging power kept hitting Lucien like a waterfall, pushing him back constantly. Two deep gullies were plowed in the ground under his feet. Seeing that the cavalry patrolling around had drawn their bows again, ready for the next round of shooting, Lucien let out a roar like a trapped beast. With him as the center, a round of purple-black oval air waves suddenly bloomed. Boom! The two armored men were instantly sent flying. However, Lucien was not in a good state either. Streams of blood slowly flowed out of his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. Ha ha ha! Laughter came out of Lucien's mouth. This peak warrior seemed to have foreseen his fate. But just like all dying beasts would fight back desperately, Lucien was also prepared for the worst. The warrior, who was covered in blood, let out a desperate and crazy roar. In that case, let's die together. Whoosh! 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 A new round of arrow rain came as expected, but this time, Lucien did not dodge at all. Countless shock waves exploded in the air in an instant, squeezing and shaking each other and spreading out in all directions. The rain of arrows hit the circle of waves that seemed to be solid and suddenly exploded into powder. Lucien had already rushed to the two armored men, laughing wildly. The broadsword in his hand was wrapped in purple-black flames as he slashed forward. The low roar instantly scattered the thick curtain of rain, as if the space in front of him was also torn open. The two armored men opposite him were not afraid. One of them held a spear, and the other held a hammer. They met the attack head-on. Boom! In an instant, countless shockwaves exploded in the wilderness. It was as if a boulder had been thrown into a pool of water. The ripples in the air had turned into waves. In an instant, more than half of the cavalry who were patrolling around the area were knocked off their horses. Ha ha ha! While laughing wildly, Lucien suddenly let go of the broadsword in his hand. Taking advantage of the fact that the two armored men had not yet recovered from the stiff state caused by the previous blow, Lucien's body moved like a nimble fish to their side. Clang! Clang! Lucien's fingers were like hooks, grabbing one of the arms of the two armored men tightly. He used so much strength that the armor was deformed. Taking advantage of the forward momentum, the madness on Lucien's face became more and more intense as he roared. Crack! Both arms were cut off by Lucien. Blood sprayed all over Lucien's body. At this time, he seemed to have completely fallen into madness. His whole body was bathed in blood, and he roared at the sky like a demon crawling out of hell. Lucien immediately turned back and roared, "Die, all of you!" Who at this moment, a whistling sound suddenly came from the sky. A silver light with the power of wind and thunder descended from the sky. However, Lucien seemed to have expected the enemy above him. He stopped abruptly, turned around, and laughed wildly at Colin who was descending from the sky. "You're finally here." Before his voice died away, one of his arms grabbed Colin's long sword like a dragon coming out of the sea. Chi! Blood splattered everywhere. The fingers of Lucien's right hand were almost cut off, but he did not even blink. His other hand reached out again and grabbed Colin's ankle. Colin was shocked. His huge bat wings rolled up turbulent air waves, and he tried to rise into the sky again. However, Lucien's feet seemed to be rooted to the ground. No matter how hard Colin struggled, he still did not move. Who are you?" A trace of doubt flashed in Lucien's eyes. Then he remembered a rumor he had heard. "Are you the Winged Knight?" Colin did not respond. Seeing that his opponent's face was shrouded in a cloud of blood, Lucien's curiosity grew. He laughed and roared, "Let me see your true face." Before he could finish his sentence, a wave of air suddenly erupted from beneath his feet, and the ground caved in from the pressure. Borrowing the force of the recoil, he leaped into the air and wrapped himself around Colin who was in midair. Colin flapped his bat wings and made a sharp turn in the air. Unfortunately, he could not get rid of Lucien. He only made him lose his balance temporarily. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, Colin let go of the long sword in his hand and took out the golden dagger that symbolized the authority of the guardian of the northern frontier. He stabbed at Lucien's chest. Chi! The dagger pierced into Lucien's chest, but he did not make any movement to block it. However, there was still a maniacal smile on his face. He roared, "Let's die together." Bang! One of Lucien's hands also pierced into Colin's chest as fast as lightning, grabbing the heart that was still beating. Colin cried out in pain. It was as if he had been infected by the other party's madness. His entire aura became extremely tragic. "As I said, if you can't kill me." Colin laughed wildly, "I'll make you wish you were dead." Before his voice died away, Colin opened his bloody mouth. His two fangs were shining coldly and pierced into Lucien's neck. The enormous bat wings quickly closed and embraced the two of them. "It's really you." Lucien judged Colin's identity from his words. Before he could figure out how Colin grew a pair of wings, he found that all the blood in his body was crazily flowing into Colin's mouth. It was not only his blood that was flowing away rapidly, but also his strength, temperature, and even consciousness. "Let's die together." Before the darkness enveloped him, Lucien's hands tightened. Bang! Colin's heart was crushed instantly. Boom! Thunder rolled across the sky, but the wilderness suddenly quieted down. The group of blood thralls formed a large circle. In the center of the circle was Colin and Lucien, who were in strange positions. The torrential rain poured down, but it could not wash away the smell of blood that permeated the air. After a long time, Colin stood up from Lucien's body. Then, Lucien also got up from the ground and half-knelt in front of Colin. The hatred and madness on his face had completely disappeared, replaced by mechanical obedience and deference. "Master." Colin looked at Lucien kneeling in front of him and couldn't help but smile proudly. Colin's blood shadow guards had suffered heavy losses in this hunt for Lucien. Looking around, almost everyone was injured. A rough count showed that in order to ambush Lucien, a total of 28 blood thralls had died. Even the two rank 5 blood thralls were heavily injured. Even Colin's own heart had been crushed. Fortunately, this didn't affect him much. Colin looked at the hole in his chest and touched the edge of the wound as if nothing had happened. However, although the losses were heavy, the gains were also huge. A rank 6 blood thrall. In this way, the peak strength of the blood shadow guards would be improved qualitatively. With Lucien around, Colin would no longer have to worry about his own safety in this world as long as he did not provoke the other sanctuary powerhouses. Even that resurrected Mr. Fong, as long as he hadn't completely healed the injuries of the Holy Knight's body, Colin wouldn't be unable to retaliate with the current blood shadow guards. It was a pity that the blood of a high-level warrior couldn't help Colin advance. It had to be a high-level knight. However, with a rank 6 warrior, Colin was confident that he could capture a rank 6 knight. Once he successfully entered rank 6, in addition to his blood kindred's true form, Colin felt that he could do whatever he wanted under the sanctuary. However, a rank 6 knight was much more difficult to capture than a rank 6 warrior. Moreover, such a high-level knight had to be a noble with a high status. The difficulty of capturing one was on a completely different level compared to Lucien's. Currently, Colin only knew of 2 rank 6 knights, Emperor Reinhardt and the Duke of St. Prospero of the Eastern region. Which one should he capture? Colin rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. But soon, he couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. He felt that he was biting off more than he could chew. Obviously, these two people were not people that he could deal with now. It was better to solve the problem at hand first. Thinking of this, Colin flapped his bat wings and soared into the sky, flying toward Swan City. Chapter 341. Swan City, Radiance Church. In the spacious prayer hall, Archbishop Ajani was leading the believers in prayer according to the requirements of the ceremony. Today was Sunday, and according to the customs of the church, all believers were required to perform morning prayers on this day. Of course, no matter how big the prayer hall was, it could not accommodate all the residents of Swan City. Those who could stand in the hall were basically the nobles of Swan City. As for the commoners, they could only squeeze in the square outside the church, on the streets, and even in front of their houses. As the prayer deepened, the white crystal scepter in Ajani's hand gradually glowed with platinum holy light, reflecting the radiance of the morning sun. It filled the entire prayer hall and continued to spread, coating the entire Swan City with a layer of holy light. At this moment, Swan City showed its most sacred side. Under the illumination of such a divine miracle, hundreds of thousands of believers knelt on one knee, their hands clasped together as they praised the Almighty Lord of Radiance in unison. Praise the Lord! May your light last forever and illuminate the way forward for us. After the ceremony, everyone stood up under Archbishop Ajani's lead. They collected their emotions and began a new day. The nobles in the prayer hall left one after another. Only Count Schultz was left behind by Archbishop Ajani. Count, is Viscount Angli not back yet? Count Schultz shook his head. Not yet. I've already sent someone to look for him. I believe he'll be back soon, no need to look for him. I'm already back. As soon as he finished speaking, Colin strode into the prayer hall and said with a smile, I'm sorry, Your Excellency. I came back late and didn't make it in time for Sunday morning prayers. Ajani smiled, indicating that he did not need to worry. She then asked curiously, did you catch him? Colin shrugged and said helplessly, sigh, we still let him escape. Ajani nodded doubtfully. If a grade 6 warrior wants to escape, it's hard to stop him. But you don't need to worry. I've already reported this to Imperial Dragon City. His Holiness the Pope will send holy knights to capture him. Colin nodded. He did not want to talk too much about this and prepared to leave. Seeing this, Akani tried to persuade him to stay. Viscount Angli, can you stay for a while? Hearing this, Colin suppressed the doubts in his heart and nodded. Okay. Seeing this, Count Schultz bowed and said, Lord Guardian, Your Excellency, I'll take my leave first. All right. Looking at Count Schultz's departing figure, Akani suddenly smiled and said, Sir Viscounts, Count Schultz's attitude towards you is really respectful. Colin said calmly, I'm now the guardian of the northern frontier personally conferred by His Majesty. Isn't her attitude natural? Akani looked at Colin with a meaningful gaze. So that's how it is. I thought it was because of the bloody cavalry 50 kilometers north of Swan City. Colin's pupils shrank slightly, and he asked in surprise, you even know this? Akani blinked her eyes and said in a playful tone, yes, a pious bird told me. That was right. When Colin realized that Count Schultz might be up to no good, he had already informed the bloody cavalry to come to Swan City. According to Colin's plan, if Count Schultz, who had been turned into a blood descendant, could not stand his ground under the pressure of Lucien and chose to betray him, then Colin would activate Plan B and ask the bloody cavalry to take care of everything. Fortunately, Count Schultz did not let Colin down. In this case, Colin did not have to be so cruel as to wipe out Swan Castle. However, he did not expect that Akani would know about the bloody cavalry hiding outside the city. Of course, Colin did not believe that a pious bird had revealed the traces of the bloody cavalry. It must have been the believers who reported to the church. To be honest, Colin had always admired and envied the church's intelligence ability. Of course, he was also afraid of it. However, this also made Colin realize a problem. Did Count Schultz also know the whereabouts of the bloody cavalry in advance? If she also knew, the reason why she did not betray Colin was because she was a blood descendant, or because she knew that the bloody cavalry was nearby. Once she betrayed Colin, what awaited the Schultz family would only be destruction. When Colin was lost in his thoughts, Akani's voice sounded again, "Your Excellency, what are you thinking about?" "Nothing." Colin answered casually, and then asked, "You asked me to stay just now. Is there anything I can help you with? Please follow me." Akani smiled mysteriously and walked past Colin, heading straight outside. Colin was curious and followed her step by step. The two walked out of the prayer hall and went down the spiral stairs. Finally, they came to a dim corridor. On both sides of the corridor, there were fully armored guards every few steps. When they saw Akani, they all bowed their heads to greet her. After walking for about half an hour, a steel gate appeared in front of them. The guard in front of the gate saluted to Akani, and then pushed the gate open. "Viscount Angley, please." Akani made a gesture to let Colin go first. Colin smiled and strode forward. The space inside the gate was more spacious than Colin had imagined, but it was a bit too empty. Except for the statue of the God of Light in the center and the small pool in front of the statue, there was nothing else. He could not help but wonder why such a large space was dug out just to put these two things. Looking around, Colin did not see any light source, but the whole space was full of holy light, and there was no place for darkness to hide. Bang! After Akani came in, the iron gate was closed again. Colin turned around and asked, "Where is this place?" Akani did not answer. Her eyes were a bit blurred, as if she did not hear Colin's question. She just walked slowly toward the statue. Colin furrowed his brows and followed him. Before the statue of the God of Light, Akani devoutly prostrated herself on the ground and silently prayed. Colin had no choice but to kneel on one knee before the statue, but he could not help but look at the pool in front of the statue from the corner of his eye. The pool was not big, about 3 meters in diameter, and the water inside was very shallow. But he was surprised to find that the water in the pool was not ordinary water, but more like holy water. Gulp, Colin could not help but swallow his saliva. After a while, Akani ended her prayer and stood up again. Colin immediately asked, "Is this holy water?" Akani stared at the faceless statue of the God of Light, and without turning her head, she said, "No." Colin was a little disappointed, and asked again, "Then what is this?" Ajani finally turned around. Her gaze was filled with an indescribable meaning as she said softly, "This is the accumulated power of faith." Power of faith? This was the first time Colin had learned that faith could be materialized. Yes. The gods use their mighty powers to protect humans, and humans use their faith to serve the gods. When everyone prays to the God, they will produce the power of faith, and this power of faith will be collected by the radiance churches of the various dioceses, gathering in a space similar to the one we are in. Colin rubbed his chin, staring at the swaying surface of the pool, and asked, "Then what is the use of this power of faith?" Akani shook her head and said, "The cultivation of priests requires the power of faith, but we only need a very small portion of it. Most of the power of faith is needed by the God." Colin nodded thoughtfully, and asked again, "This should be a secret of the church, why are you telling me this?" Akani did not answer this question, but said to herself, "Do you know? The power of faith gathers in this space, liquefies in the holy pool, and is then absorbed by the God through the statue." So. Colin was a little confused. Akani pointed to the pool in front of her, and asked in a low voice, "Look, the water in this pool, has it been absorbed?" Colin narrowed his eyes and looked for a long time, and found that the water in the pool did not decrease, but instead kept increasing. Because it was Sunday, and Archbishop Akani had just personally led the morning prayers, the power of faith surged in and quickly filled the pool, and then, it overflowed. What will happen if it overflows? The liquefied power of faith will disappear after leaving the holy pool. Sure enough, Colin saw that the water disappeared after overflowing. This time, he also realized that something was wrong. Since the God of Light needed the power of faith, why would he let it overflow without collecting it? Is there a problem with this statue? Colin guessed. Akani shook her head, and said in a low voice, "The holy pools under all the Radiance churches in the northern frontier are like this, even the holy pool under the Holy Light Church in Imperial Dragon City, is the same. The power of faith is not collected, but overflows the holy pool, and is wasted." Colin narrowed his eyes, and asked with a serious expression, "I still want to know, why are you showing me this?" If the things that Akani had exposed to Colin were to be leaked, it would definitely cause a crisis of faith. The God of Light had stopped receiving offerings from humans. What did this mean? Akani still did not answer this question, but asked in return, "Do you know why the Dark Emperor was killed 300 years ago?" Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he said, "Could it be that he discovered this secret?" "Yes." Ajani nodded. However, what truly sounded the Dark Emperor's death knell was something he once said. What did he say? He said, the expression on Akani's face suddenly became extremely complicated. "The god is dead." Chapter 342. The god is dead. Colin's eyes widened, and his heart was in turmoil. He knew what this meant in this extraordinary world, and finally understood why the Dark Emperor had to die. Even after his death, all records of him were deliberately destroyed. It was as if someone was desperately trying to completely erase his existence from history. It turned out that it was because of such a rebellious statement. If the Church allowed the Dark Emperor's words to spread widely in the Empire of Light, it would be a huge blow to the belief system of humans. So, the judge, Duke Saint Theon appeared. Colin's right hand could not help but touch the blade of judgment at his waist, and his heart was filled with mixed feelings. The history that had puzzled him back then had finally been unveiled. Then, is the God of Light really dead? Colin could not help but ask. Ajani shook her head and said, "I don't know. No one knows." What she said was true. How could mortals guess the life and death of a god? It was just that the God of Light did not collect the power of faith. This did not mean that the God of Light was really dead. Maybe he did not need the power of faith anymore. Of course, this guess was more likely to cause panic. The God of Light's protection of humans was actually exchanged by humans using the power of faith to serve him. If he did not need the power of faith, did that mean that he did not need humans anymore, and did not protect them anymore? No matter what, once the believers knew the secret below the Church, the foundation of the Church of Light's existence would be shaky. There should be many people who know this secret, right? Colin asked again. Yes. High-ranking priests who are bishops and above all know this secret. In addition, the core members of the 5 paladin families also know. The paladin families know this secret because of the Dark Emperor, right? Yes. Ajani nodded. And the reason why he was killed was because he gathered the 5 dukes to make this secret public. Colin sighed, and felt that the Dark Emperor's death was not unjust. This kind of action was not only destroying the foundation of the Church, but also harming the fundamental interests of the nobles. It must be known that the Radiance Church and the nobles of the Empire were interdependent. Although they were currently fighting fiercely for power, both sides had a tacit understanding to control the intensity of the struggle within a certain range. They wouldn't really go to the point of no return. After all, if the Church really collapsed, who would baptize the nobles? Without receiving baptism, how could a knight be born? Without knights, what right did the nobles have to rule the empire? How could they fight against the alien races that were eyeing them covetously from all directions? Therefore, even if the nobles knew about this secret, they would never reveal it to the public. Therefore, even if the royal family had already fallen out with the Church, they would never use such a method that would hurt both sides. Other than the Dark Emperor who had no idea what he was thinking. So, you're telling me this secret now because I've become a core member of the House of Saint Hilda in your eyes? Ajani nodded, confirming Colin's judgment. The core members of the 5 great paladin clans all know of this secret. I will also inform Lord Dukes of the North. However, she immediately changed the topic and said, however, there's another reason why I'm telling you this secret. Colin's eyes narrowed. He knew that this should be the true reason why Ajani had asked him to come here. What's the reason? Ajani's eyes wandered, her whole body exuding a holy radiance. However, the words she said were blasphemous. I want to reveal this secret to the public. What? Colin thought that he had heard wrongly and looked at Ajani in astonishment. Ajani's eyes were firm as she repeated her words. Are you crazy? Colin could not help but exclaim. Of course, Colin's shock was not due to his devout faith and reverence towards the God of Light, but because he could not understand Ajani's motive. As the Archbishop of the Northern Frontier, the Church of Light was Ajani's foundation. Revealing this secret to the public would lead to a crisis of faith. What good would it do her? Not to mention that doing so would definitely lead to a fatal disaster. The last person who wanted to do this was the Emperor of the Empire, but he still ended up in a miserable state. Did Ajani think that she would be spared? If she dared to do so, she would definitely become the enemy of the entire Empire of Light. Whether it was the church or the nobles, they would all want to kill her at all costs. Why do you want to do this? Colin asked in a low voice. Because the believers of our Lord have the right to know this truth, Ajani said calmly, giving a reason that Colin did not know how to evaluate. Seeing Colin's doubtful face, Ajani's expression did not change as she explained. No matter the reason why our Lord no longer collects the power of faith, the church and the nobles have no right to hide this truth. However, faith should not be built on deception. I understand that they are all worried that this truth will cause panic and even a crisis of faith. However, if some people's faith is shaken because of this, then they are not worthy of being believers of our Lord. Moreover, isn't this a test that our Lord has for us? If this is really the case, then our current response will most likely disappoint him greatly. Hearing Ajani's righteous explanation, Colin did not know what to say for a moment. He did not know if this Archbishop of the Northern Frontier was truly so devout that she could not tolerate her faith being blasphemed, or if she was just looking for a high-sounding excuse to conceal her true ulterior motives. Colin narrowed his eyes, and his tone became somewhat cold. Then, Your Eminence, why do you think that I will support your idea? As a believer of our Lord, a knight of the Northern Frontier, and a Viscount of the Empire, I should stop you from doing such a foolish thing, right? Because I believe in the guidance of the Holy Light. Ajani stared into Colin's eyes and gave him an answer that left him speechless. The guidance of the Holy Light. Yes, your affinity with the Holy Light is something I have never seen before. I believe that this is the guidance of our Lord. A devout knight like you will definitely not tolerate the Church continuing to deceive our Lord's believers. Colin fell silent. He remembered that Ajani had indeed said such words back in Coldwinter City. Furthermore, Pope Gregory had also said similar words to Colin back in Imperial Dragon City. Could it be that he was really the chosen one? Of course, such an illusory thing was obviously unable to convince Colin. Sometimes, a white lie is more precious than the cruel truth. Colin said expressionlessly. He did not want to become an ally of this crazy Archbishop of the Northern Frontier. In Colin's opinion, what she wanted to do was practically courting death. Good intentions. A cold smile appeared on Ajani's pretty face. So, tampering with the Duke's baptism ceremony was also out of good intentions. Colin's pupils shrank, but he was not too surprised. Ajani had said that she had met Vera on the way to Swan City. With her insight as an archbishop, it was not surprising that she could see that the Pope had tampered with Vera's baptism. Ajani saw the change in Colin's expression and was delighted. She hurriedly continued to agitate him. Actually, the upper echelons of the Church have long been corrupted. They have long forgotten their original intentions and mission. Although many people are desperately trying to slander the Dark Emperor and find ways to erase his traces, in reality, they have already been influenced by his arrogant words. They vaguely feel that the God of Light is really no longer around, or at least has cut off all contact with this world. When there are no longer any scrutinizing eyes above their heads, they have also begun to become unscrupulous. The original pure faith has long been corrupted and tarnished. Fighting for power and profit has become their only goal and pursuit. They keep saying that it is for the God of light, but in reality, it is only for their own interests and status. Viscount Angley, do you think that such a church is really suitable to continue to dominate the spiritual world of mankind? Colin stared into Ajani's eyes. For some reason, he suddenly thought of another woman, Queen Medela. Chapter 343. Colin Lynn suddenly thought of something. Could this Archbishop Ajani be related to the royal family? Thus, he seemingly inadvertently raised his hands to his chest, palms facing inwards, his fingers intertwined, forming a lotus-like handprint. Then, he carefully observed Ajani's reaction. However, Colin was disappointed. After seeing this handprint, Ajani only looked puzzled and did not show any other expression. This handprint was shown to Colin by Queen Medela after her alliance with him. She even said that anyone who saw this handprint could be trusted. But obviously, Ajani was not an ally of the royal family. Colin immediately withdrew his handprint and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He smiled and said, "I think you should go to the royal family. They are more interested in the Pope's dark secrets." Ajani shook her head and said, "Sir Viscounts, you are wrong. The royal family is well aware of the Church's depravity, and is also willing to fight against the Church. However, they will never agree to this truth being made public. If I go to them, I will only end up like the Dark Emperor. Sorry, Archbishop, I do not want to end up like the Dark Emperor." Colin shrugged and rejected, "With just the two of us, even if this truth is made public, we will not be able to escape the pursuit of the Church and the Holy Knight family. We will also be slandered as lunatics and blasphemers. No one will believe our words. Sir Viscounts, I am not a stupid person. Before I have enough power, of course I will not make this truth public. The reason why I chose you as my partner is because you are not a member of the Holy Knight family, but you have the potential to dominate a territory. Sir Archbishop, you think too highly of me." Colin's expression was still indifferent. "No." Ajani's eyes flashed with an inexplicable brilliance, and her tone carried a hint of bewitchment. "You are now the guardian of the northern frontier, and I know that the half-elven kingdom is also under your control. In the future, even if you lead your troops to the east and defeat the Pegasus army, it is not impossible for you to enter the White Dew City. However, have you thought of a problem? Even if one day you really conquer the eastern region, can the Angeli family become a duke?" Colin's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to understand what Akani wanted to say. "Your Excellency Viscounts, the position of duke has never been granted to anyone who isn't a holy knight. No matter what kind of dazzling achievements he had made in the past. I know your talent is amazing, and you're already a 5th grade knight at such a young age, but do you think you can become a holy knight?" Colin did not answer. However, he felt that if he could drink the blood of a holy knight, he might be able to step into the sanctuary realm. "It's not that I want to put you down, but in the Empire's 1,000+ years of history, there has never been anyone who isn't from a holy knight family who has stepped foot into the Saint Domain. I don't know what kind of secrets there are. However, I feel that no matter how talented you are, I'm afraid you won't be able to break through this shackle. So, even if you become a 6th grade knight, what's the difference between you and the 6th grade warrior Lucien? He's attached to Count Schultz, and you can't leave the house of Saint Hilda either. Even if you conquer the eastern region one day, the Angeli family will never become the lord of the eastern region." Colin narrowed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "What are you trying to say?" Akani walked a few steps closer and stared into Colin's eyes. She said seriously, "You've been asking me why I chose you as my partner, haven't you? This is the real reason. Because you're not from a holy knight family. The only people who don't want to see this belief system, which is based on deception, collapse is actually the Church and the Holy Knight family. That's why they work together to hide the truth, to prevent a crisis of faith from happening. However, as a descendant of a holy knight family, Viscount Angley, even if a crisis of faith happens, and the belief system of the Church of Light collapses, is it really a bad thing for you? Without the power of faith, there would be no priests. Without priests, there would be no new knights, and naturally, there would be no more holy knights. Without holy knights, how can the royal family and the four great families stand at the top of the empire? Why can't the Angeli family become a duke? Even. Akane suddenly stopped talking, but Colin completely understood what she meant. At the same time, he saw the true face hidden under Akane's pious appearance. That face was filled with something called ambition. Moreover, he was also frightened by Akane's madness. This woman looked holy, quiet, and compassionate, but in reality, she was a crazy ambitious woman who wanted nothing more than to throw the world into chaos. Seeing Colin's silence, Akane thought he was moved, but still couldn't make up his mind. She opened her mouth again to tempt him. Your Excellency Viscounts, now that the royal family and the church are at war, it's our best chance. During this trip to Imperial Dragon City, I'm sure Emperor Reinhardt must have encouraged you to march into the eastern region. To tell you the truth, His Holiness the Pope has told me many times to stop the army of the north from successfully taking down White Dew City. However, if you cooperate with me, I can help you block all the pressure from the church, and promise you a stable rear. This way, you can also march into the eastern region without any distractions. As long as we conquer the eastern region, we will have 2 territories in our hands, and have the capital to not fear the church and the royal family. Colin sneered and said, Your Excellency Archbishop, have you forgotten that the Empire still has 2 holy knights? Will they sit and watch us shake the foundation of the entire knight system? Akane said confidently, Your Excellency Viscounts, have you forgotten that the eastern region also has a force that can resist the holy knights? Yevel. Colin's face changed, and he suddenly realized something, and immediately said, So you are with Mr. Yevel. Akane suddenly smiled, her beautiful face was like a peach blossom in full bloom. Your Excellency Viscounts, do you have confidence in our plan now? Obviously, Akane had tacitly agreed with Colin's guess. Colin lowered his head, various thoughts running through his mind. He did not expect that the haunting Mr. Yevel had already quietly extended his hand into the church, and had even bribed a high-ranking person like the Archbishop of the Northern Frontier. No wonder he dared to kidnap the Archbishop of Swan City, and even brazenly kill him, and was not afraid of the church's revenge. Akane would definitely cover for him, and help him get through the weakest period. And now, they had actually set their sights on Colin, and wanted to rope in the actual controller of the Northern Frontier. It had to be said that Colin was somewhat moved. He suddenly realized that this was indeed a good opportunity. Originally, Colin was caught between the royal family and the church. Both sides were trying to rope him in, but both wanted him to be a sharp sword in their hands. Now that a third party was added to the mix, Colin's options were greater. The space for him to maneuver was also wider. At the very least, if Akane and Colin reached a secret agreement, he would not have to worry about the church causing trouble on the northern frontier when he was advancing into the eastern region, and dragging him down. Of course, Colin was still very wary of Mr. G and Ajani. The two of them were not good people. They had taken a fancy to Colin only because they wanted him to be their tool. May I ask if I can meet Mr. Yevel? Colin probed. Akane was somewhat hesitant, but still nodded, I will convey your intentions to Mr. Yevel, but you must know that Prince Lacey is currently at the northern frontier, and is pursuing him relentlessly. It is not convenient for Mr. Yevel to show himself, so I may not be able to arrange a meeting with you in the near future. I understand. Colin smiled faintly, but did not say much. He knew that he had not really gained the other party's trust. By the way, can you help to remove the divine spell that Vera is under? Akane shook her head, I am sorry, Your Excellency Viscounts, that is a divine spell cast by the Pope himself, and only he can remove it. But you don't have to worry. With me at the northern frontier, the church will not be a hindrance to you. I will also not use the Duke to cause trouble for you. That's good. Colin nodded. In fact, this was the biggest reason why he was willing to cooperate with Akane. As for how their relationship would develop in the future, and whether or not they would fall out, that would have to wait until the future. Colin was confident that by that time, he would have the confidence to confront the other party directly. I look forward to working with you. Akane stretched out her small white hand and smiled. Colin also shook the other party's hand and smiled brightly. I look forward to working with you. Chapter 344. Leaving the Radiance Church, Colin strolled back to Swan Castle alone. He learned from the butler that Count Schultz had just gone out to inspect the territory. Colin did not mind. The Countess had just experienced Lucien's rebellion, and she needed to quickly pacify the people and deal with the remnants of Lucien's forces. After losing Lucien, the Schultz family could only rely on Colin if they wanted to maintain their status in the northern frontier. He believed that the rest of the Schultz family would also understand this and make the right choice. When night fell, Colin finished his dinner and was about to take a bath with the help of the maids. The butler came to report that Count Schultz had returned to Swan Castle. Got it. I'll go see the Count after my bath. Colin submerged his body in the hot water of a suitable temperature, admiring the various exquisite decorations in the bathroom as he recalled what Archbishop Ajani had told him during the day. He had to admit that Colin really admired Mr. Mao from the House of St. Thean. It seemed that Mr. Mao could surprise him every time. Of course, it could also be a shock. Colin was very curious about how Mr. Mao had persuaded Ajani to rebel. As the youngest archbishop of the Radiance Empire and highly regarded by the Pope, Ajani could be said to have a bright future. It was almost certain that she would become a cardinal in the future. She could even become the first female pope in the history of the Radiance Empire. So, how did Mr. Mao persuade Ajani to give up such a bright future and choose an extremely dangerous path of rebellion? Colin could not figure it out. However, Colin did not have a bad impression of Mr. Mao. Although they had always been on opposite sides, Mr. Mao had not caused any substantial damage to Colin. Of course, this was also because Colin had never been Mr. Mao's main target. After all, Colin was just a small figure before, and was not worthy of Mr. Mao's special attention. Now that he had become the guardian of the northern frontier, Colin was qualified to be targeted. However, he did not expect Mr. Chang to choose to rope him in. Colin could also guess that the reason the other party deliberately left Bishop John's body in the basement of Swan Castle was to use the Schultz family to get rid of Colin. However, he did not expect that Colin would expel Lucien from Swan City and successfully control Count Schultz. In addition, Mr. Chang should be at his weakest right now. Seeing that Colin was not a simple character that was easy to deal with, he had no choice but to change his strategy and rope him in. Of course, Colin was also extremely wary of Mr. Feng. He knew that if Mr. Feng successfully survived this period of weakness, there would be a question mark as to whether he could continue to tolerate the northern frontier being controlled by Colin. Therefore, Colin knew that he had to seize the time when Mr. Chang was recovering and work hard to strengthen his own power and influence. In this way, no matter how the future of the Empire of Light changed, Colin would have the ability to protect himself. While thinking, Colin heard light footsteps approaching. He did not pay much attention, thinking that it was a maid who came to add water. But then, a snow-white and delicate foot reached into the water, followed by a white and slender leg. Under Colin's surprised gaze, the naked Count Schultz had already sat down beside him. The Countess's body was impeccable. Her soft skin had a pearl-like luster, and above her plump buttocks was a slender waist. Further up, there were two bright red dots that made Colin's blood boil. "Master, let me serve you in the bath," Count Schultz whispered in Colin's ear, with a seductive smile on his face. Colin was intoxicated by the fragrant scent, and his slightly stiff body gradually relaxed. Waves suddenly appeared on the originally calm water surface. The first rays of the morning sun shone on the mirror-like surface of Swan Lake. Thousands of rays of light that looked like fragmented rainbows were projected on the mirror-like surface of the lake. Colin stood on the balcony of the highest floor of Swan Castle, looking at the beautiful scenery in front of him that was somewhat unreal. He felt unprecedentedly satisfied. He took a deep breath, and his nose was filled with dew and the fragrance of flowers and plants. Suddenly, a series of familiar footsteps came from behind him. Colin turned around and saw Count Schultz walking over with enchanting steps. After a night, the Countess, who was already beautiful, looked even more gorgeous. She was only wearing a thin silk dress with a low-cut, corset, and backless design that vividly showed off her beautiful body curves and lustrous and smooth skin. As she walked, two snow-white and slender legs were faintly discernible under the open-necked dress, like a blooming iris flower. "Good morning, master." Count Schultz's charming smile made Colin's heart skip a beat. He touched the tip of his nose and smiled. "You can still call me by my old name." "Yes, Sir Viscounts." Count Schultz changed the way he addressed Lucien, but his attitude did not change at all. After a night of deep communication, Colin also knew that Countess Schultz was actually a woman who did not have many opinions of her own. Her weak personality was actually not suitable to be a lord. That was why she chose to marry Lucien, and now she did not hesitate to rely on Colin. However, such a personality was indeed more convenient for Colin to control. The ambiguous past between you and Marquis Garcia was also made up to pretend to be Vera's birth mother, right? Yes. Countess Schultz's white cheeks blushed. "However, the Duke of St. Hilda did want to set me up with Marquis Garcia, but Marquis Garcia did not want to give up the command of the Black Cavalry, and Marquis Garcia's importance in the northern frontier, so the Duke of St. Hilda gave up." "Then why did you betray the Duke of St. Hilda in Ice Stone City?" "Actually, I had no choice at that time. Among the 200,000 soldiers that Marquis Charles sacrificed, there was one of the most elite soldiers of the Schultz family. After learning about this, the family complained about it. I was also very dissatisfied with the Duke of St. Hilda, so I followed the lords of the northern frontier to force the Duke to give us an explanation." Colin nodded and asked, "How many soldiers does the Schultz family have now?" Countess Schultz tucked her hair behind her ear and said, "We should be able to gather 60 to 70,000 soldiers." "Good. Reorganize this army. I may need to conscript them at any time." "Yes. I will return to Coldwinter City tomorrow. If you need any help, let me know as soon as possible." "You are leaving so soon?" Countess Schultz asked in surprise. Her beautiful face was full of reluctance. "Yes." Colin reached out and pulled the Countess into his arms. He wrapped his arms around her supple waist and said gently, "I can't relax now. I have to race against time." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Colin smelled the fragrance of Countess Schultz's hair and said vaguely, "I have a feeling that there will be a great change in the Empire. Therefore, I have to prepare in advance." "Great change?" Countess Schultz's voice tightened. "You don't have to panic. Just do as I say." "Yes. Also, you have to be careful of Archbishop Ajani. Don't believe her words so easily. Also, if that Duke of St. Hilda appears in Swan City again, send me a message immediately." "Okay." After giving these instructions, Colin reached out and grabbed Countess Schultz's smooth chin. He lowered his head and kissed her. Since they were about to leave, they had to bid farewell properly. Chapter 345. It was dawn. The rising sun shone gently through the dense clouds, and the mist surging like waves shrouded the mountains and the wilderness. A caravan of merchants was treading on the morning dew, traveling along a small path in the forest. At the front of the caravan, a flag embroidered with tulips fluttered in the wind. After passing through a bumpy path, the axles of the carriage creaked under the jolts. The curtains of the carriage were suddenly lifted, revealing a round, chubby face. Lord Oliver, what are your orders? A mercenary standing guard beside the carriage asked with a smile. Oliver looked carefully at the winding path in front of him and asked with a frown, why did you choose this path? My lord, although this path is slightly more difficult to traverse, it's shorter. We'll reach Swan City in about 3 days. Oliver did not seem to be worried. He asked, where's your captain? He's right in front. The mercenary was just speaking when he saw a figure walking quickly towards him. He immediately said, my lord, the captain is just coming over. Oliver turned his head and saw that the bearded Captain Jack had already arrived at the side of the carriage. The captain's brows were tightly knitted together, and he looked very worried. Lord Oliver, I've just received news that something has happened in Swan City. What? Oliver's heart skipped a beat, and his expression changed instantly. He hurriedly asked, what happened? I heard that Count Schultz's husband, Lord Lucian, murdered Bishop John, and is now being pursued by the army. How could this be? Why would Lucian murder Bishop John? I don't know. Then can we still enter Swan City? We should be able to. Swan City is not locked down. However, I advise you to reconsider. After all, Swan City is not peaceful now. Oliver's brows were tightly knitted together, and his chubby face was scrunched up in worry. He was in a dilemma. Seeing this, Captain Jack added, I also heard that Viscount Angley is currently in Swan City. He was the one who exposed Lucian's crime. Viscount Angley is also in the city. Oliver suddenly became excited, as if the name had a strange magic power. Yes. Colonel Jack nodded, then probed, I heard that you've dealt with the Viscounts before. Is that true? Oliver immediately puffed out his chest. His face glowed with boundless glory as he boasted loudly. Of course it's true. Back then, before the Viscounts inherited the title, we already knew each other. We even slept in the same tent and went to the battlefield together. Just as Oliver was about to brag about his time with Viscount Angley to the mercenary leader in front of him, the ground suddenly began to tremble slightly. Earthquake? Oliver asked stupidly. However, it didn't take long for the ground to shake more and more violently. Even the grass and leaves were shaking violently. Walala, it was as if spring thunder had exploded the earth, or as if a surging flood had swept over. The shattered sand and stones on the ground danced as if they had been picked up and put down by an invisible hand. Looking from the sky, it looked like boiling water. It's the cavalry. Colonel Jack pointed to the front with a trembling finger and his voice changed. Countless black shadows instantly appeared on the horizon in front of him, filling up the space between heaven and earth. The densely packed cavalry surged forward like a tornado, crushing the rocks and withered grass on the ground into smithereens. Oliver and his party seemed to be dumbfounded. They were stunned and shivering in place. They were completely at a loss. It was impossible to run away. They could only silently pray in their hearts that this terrifying cavalry was not the enemy. It's the blood cavalry. Not knowing who saw the blood-colored flag fluttering in the wind, someone immediately shouted. Oliver's eyes lit up when he heard that. He scrambled out of the carriage and looked at the cavalry squad galloping towards them. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "We are the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, the Tulip Chamber of Commerce. I know Sir Viscount Angley." Not long after, a blood cavalry squad came to the front of Oliver. The leading officer was sitting high on the warhorse. His sharp eyes coldly looked at Oliver through the small holes in the armor. His imposing manner made the whole caravan silent. "What's your name?" My name is Oliver, the president of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce." "Is Viscount Angley in front?" The blood cavalry officer nodded and said, "Come with me, the Viscount wants to see you." Oliver's spirit was refreshed. He quickly ordered his men to bring a horse to pull the carriage. He moved his fat body and clumsily climbed up. The officer looked at his difficult appearance and became impatient. He stepped forward and grabbed Oliver's collar. In his exclamation, he lifted him on the back of his horse and then urged the warhorse to go in the direction of the blood cavalry. By the time Oliver arrived in front of Colin, he was almost out of breath from the jolting. "Viscount Angley." Ugh! After this fellow dismounted, he vomited all over the ground, and then weakly greeted Colin. Colin looked at the familiar fat face and asked the attendant to pass him a pot of water. He smiled and asked, "Oliver, I heard that you are now the president of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce." Oliver drank the water and finally recovered. He quickly replied, "Yes, Sir Viscounts. After the death of Lady Penny, I was chosen by Count Aumont to take over the Tulip Chamber of Commerce." The Count Aumont that Oliver mentioned was Vala. Of course, this appointment was actually approved by Colin. He had a good impression of the fat merchant. After taking control of the Aumont family through Vala, he signaled the other party to push Oliver to the position of president of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce. Later, the obedient and sensible Oliver began to clean up the remaining forces of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce under Vala's instructions. So far, the progress was said to be smooth. "You are going to Swan City?" "Yes, sir." Oliver's small eyes turned and took the opportunity to ask, "I heard that the situation in Swan City is a bit chaotic now. I wonder if our trip will." "Don't worry." Colin waved his hand and comforted, "The Schultz family has stabilized the situation. You will not have any problems going." "That's good." Oliver was relieved. He had an inexplicable trust in Colin. Colin looked at the old acquaintance and suddenly asked, "I heard that the merchants of the Northern Frontier are preparing to unite and establish a Northern Frontier Merchants Association." "Yes, sir." Oliver glanced at Colin's expression and answered carefully, "The Tulip Chamber of Commerce is also preparing to join the Northern Frontier Merchants Association. Count Aumont knows about this and has agreed." Colin nodded and asked, "Who is the president of the Merchants Association?" "Sir, the president's candidate has not been decided yet. However, we plan to hold a meeting in chilly winter at the end of this month to decide the president's candidate." Colin stroked his chin, not knowing what to think. After a while, he spoke again, "Oliver, do you want to be the president of the Northern Frontier Merchants Association?" Oliver's fat body trembled, not knowing if it was due to nervousness or excitement. After hesitating for a while, he gave a slippery answer, "I will obey your orders." Colin smiled faintly and didn't comment on Oliver's answer. Instead, he changed the topic. "Instead," he said, "help me spread the news. Tell the merchants and chambers of commerce in the northern frontier that the House of St. Hilda is preparing to borrow money to tide over the current difficulties. The loan amount is huge. Tell the interested merchants to come to chilly winter before the end of the month." "Yes." Oliver quickly agreed. However, Colin did not mention the matter of him being the president of the Merchants Association. Oliver was itching but did not dare to take the initiative to ask. "Well, go to Swan City by yourself. Remember to meet me at chilly winter at the end of the month." "Yes, sir." Later, Colin gently squeezed the horse's belly and joined the main troop of the bloody cavalry in Oliver's worried eyes. They went all the way to the north. Chapter 346. At this time, it was already the end of summer, the weather was gradually cooling down, and the sun was no longer scorching. Colin led the bloody cavalry all the way north, and it only took him 6 days to arrive at Coldwinter City. It was evening, and the majestic Coldwinter City looked more solemn in the sunset. When Colin arrived at the bottom of the city wall, he found that Vera was already standing in front of the suspension bridge, welcoming the man who had returned from afar. She was wearing a purple lady's dress, which set off the beautiful curves of her body, but did not lose her dignity in elegance. The light makeup just right made the original beautiful face more bright and moving. She looked at Colin with her beautiful eyes full of tenderness and sweetness. Colin felt warm in his heart, and he immediately turned over and strode up. Although he wanted to hold the lovely person in front of him in his arms, Colin suppressed this impulse, and according to the proper aristocratic etiquette, he knelt down on one knee to greet his lord. But he did not expect that Vera had already pulled Colin before he knelt down, and said intimately, "Colin, welcome home." Colin then no longer cared about the red tape, leaned over and kissed Vera's smooth forehead, and said with a smile, "My wife, you are so beautiful today." Vera smiled sweetly, and then took Colin's arm, and walked into the city together. Teacher. Inside the city gate, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy greeted him in a crisp voice. Colin nodded to the two little guys, and then helped Vera into the carriage. Surrounded by a team of guards, the carriage passed through half of the city, and came to the Lion's Roar Castle on the top of the mountain. The servants had already prepared a sumptuous dinner to welcome Colin's return. Walking into the Knight's Hall with Vera, the air was filled with a faint rose fragrance. Marquis Garcia stood in the middle of the hall, wearing a neat noble attire. He nodded at Colin. Compared to a month ago, Marquis Garcia seemed to be in much better spirits, and there was some color on his face. However, his posture was still stooped, and he held a cane in his hand. His eyes were no longer sharp, and it seemed that the all-powerful army god of the northern frontier had completely disappeared. Colin also hurriedly bowed in return, and exchanged a look with the other party, but did not say anything. At this time, Scholar Duane, Knight Campbell, and the Bishop Emeritus also saluted Colin. Young Master Joyce was also in the hall, but this young man was not good at hiding his emotions. He nodded at Colin perfunctorily, then looked at the ground with puffed cheeks, as if he was very reluctant to appear here. Of course, Colin would not pay attention to a child who was throwing a tantrum, and he invited everyone to take a seat. For such a formal banquet, everyone's seating was particular. Colin and Vera sat side by side at the head of the table. On the right were Marquis Garcia and the Bishop Emeritus. On the left were Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. Below them were Joyce, Scholar Duane, and the Knights of the House of St. Hilda. As Archbishop Agatha was still in Swan City dealing with Bishop John's funeral, the Bishop Emeritus of Coldwinter City represented the church at the banquet. Colin looked around and did not see the former Imperial Minister of Agriculture, whom he had abducted from Winterspring Town. He asked, "Why don't I see Scholar Sonny?" Scholar Duane smiled and said, "Scholar Sonny said that he was researching the northern frontier to prepare for the agricultural reform. Therefore, he is not in Coldwinter City now." Colin nodded and thought that Scholar Sonny was really dedicated to his work. He had just arrived and he had already started his research. He ignored him and smiled as he asked Vera to announce the start of the banquet. Vera immediately raised her golden wine glass and said, "Everyone, please drink this glass. May the glory of the God of Light bless us and may the house of St. Hilda prosper forever." Everyone raised their wine glasses one after another and responded loudly. Colin drank the champagne in his glass and said with a smile, "Everyone, please enjoy the delicious food tonight." Everyone cheered and began to focus on the food on the table. In this world, it was a very serious matter for the feudal lord to host a banquet. There was a set of very standard etiquette. During the meal, no one was allowed to speak until the main course was served. They had to knock their cutlery on the table to indicate that they were full. Only then could they chat with other people who were full. The whole process was rather boring, and the only fun was to see who ate more. In fact, this was also part of the etiquette. The more one ate, the more satisfied they were with the food prepared by the feudal lord. At the same time, they could also show their strength and bravery. The cooking skills of the House of St. Hilda were of course top-notch. There were grilled crocodile tail, oysters with white mushrooms, steamed salmon, roasted goose liver, cream salad, all kinds of delicious dishes were placed on the huge long table. Amidst the clanging sounds of the expanding knives and forks, everyone tried their best to stuff the food into their stomachs while maintaining their etiquette. The maids were like butterflies flying through flowers. With light footsteps, they kept changing the plates and refilling the wine for everyone. Although Colin did not need these ordinary foods to replenish his energy, He also began to eat when he saw that everyone had a high appetite. The maids behind him had already changed his plate 4 times. Seeing that the maids were about to change his plate for the 5th time, Colin finally knocked on his plate to indicate that he was full. Vera, who was sitting at the side, had already finished eating. She smiled and said, "Colin, you have a good appetite today." "Yes, after leaving the northern frontier for so long, I still missed the food at home." The Bishop Emeritus also knocked on his plate and put down his knife and fork. He asked, "Your Excellency, I heard that Bishop John of Swan City was killed by Lucian." To be precise, Lucian colluded with outsiders to murder him. Next, Colin selectively recounted what had happened in Swan City to everyone. Of course, he did not mention the Duke of St. Hilda, who had come back from the dead. He just used the word mysterious instead. Mr. Chang's reincarnation was too strange and difficult to explain clearly. Moreover, Colin and Mr. Chang had reached a secret agreement, so he didn't want to create unnecessary trouble and cause unnecessary trouble. Even though Colin had already hidden the most strange part, everyone was still shocked. Obviously, they did not expect that the Peak Warrior, the husband of Count Schultz, would do such a thing. May the light of the Lord shine on Bishop John and let his soul rest in peace. After listening to the story, the Bishop Emeritus lowered his head and prayed with a complicated expression. Looking at this scene, everyone also lowered their heads and prayed to express their condolences. Colin looked at the people who were praying with a complicated expression. If they knew that the Lord of Light could no longer hear their prayers and receive their power of faith, would they still be pious? After praying, everyone began to chat. Seeing that everyone had finished their main meal, the butler ordered the maids to serve dessert. Colin and Vera shared all kinds of things they had seen and heard during their trip to Imperial Dragon City, and the atmosphere gradually became relaxed and harmonious. However, Colin noticed that Joyce had been whispering in Princess Judy's ear, making Princess Judy giggle from time to time. This made Colin's expression change slightly. He was very curious. Did Joyce really hit it off with Princess Judy, or was he deliberately trying to get close to the princess under the guidance of someone else? If it was the latter, the candles on the long table gradually burned out, and the banquet came to an end. Vera stood up and announced the end of the banquet. She then held Colin's hand and walked out of the hall. However, Colin stopped at the entrance of the Knight's Hall. After waiting for Marquis Garcia to catch up with him, he smiled at Vera and said, "You can go back first. I want to talk to the Marquis for a while." "Okay." Vera smiled gently and then left. Marquis Garcia nodded at Colin and said, "Follow me to the study." "Okay." Chapter 347. When Colin walked into the study, he noticed that the layout of the room had completely changed. The tables, chairs, cabinets, floors, and windows were all remade with brand new mahogany, and the entire room was filled with a faint smell of wood. A row of white crystals was inlaid on the white walls. These crystals were a special arcane material that could magnify light. Even without too many candles, the entire room was as bright as day. A huge specimen of a tiger's head was originally hanging above the fireplace. It was said that the previous Duke of St. Hilda had hunted it himself, but now it had disappeared and was replaced by a gorgeous blood rose wreath. The changes in the study seemed to imply that the owner of the castle had changed. Count Schultz is not Vera's biological mother. Fortunately, you did not fall into his trap, Marquis Garcia said. Colin nodded, and then carefully asked, "Then, Vera's biological mother is?" Marquis Garcia looked at Colin with a warning look, hesitated for a moment, and said, "You don't need to know who she is. You just need to know that she is no longer alive. So, no matter who comes forward and claims to be Vera's biological mother, it is all a lie." Colin sighed secretly, and he thought that Queen Midella had indeed lied. My goodness, they are all a bunch of actors. Fortunately, I am also one of them. Then, who knows the true identity of Vera's biological mother? Colin asked again. This was because he realized that Mr. Xing dared to let Count Schultz pretend to be Vera's biological mother, and he was confident that Marquis Garcia would not dare to expose them in public. Obviously, he knew the true identity of Vera's biological mother, and he knew that this identity should not be exposed. The question was, how did Mr. Xing find out? Colin could understand that Queen Midella knew about this matter. After all, they were brother and sister, and it was not surprising that she knew some of her brother's secrets. But Mr. Xing. Could it be that when he took over the body of the Duke of St. Hilda, he also obtained his memories? Why do you ask? Marquis Garcia looked at Colin with vigilant eyes. Colin had no choice but to tell him about how Mr. Fong might have possessed the body of the Duke of St. Hilda and how he had bewitched Count Schultz to impersonate Vera's biological mother. Of course, he did not tell her about the secret agreement he had made with a Johnny in the basement of the church. Marquis Garcia was silent for a long time, his expression constantly changing. In fact, Marquis Garcia knew that the body buried in the family tomb was not the real body of his brother. When Colin had brought him back from the eastern region, he had confessed to him. He could also understand the necessity of using a fake corpse to fool them under the circumstances at that time, so he didn't blame Colin too harshly. He only said that after Vera successfully inherited the dukedom, he would come back to the Morrison family to ask for the corpse of the previous duke. However, he did not expect that the body had already been taken over by Mr. Fong. Moreover, this kind of reincarnation was too incredible. Marquis Garcia found it difficult to accept for a while. After pondering for a long time, Marquis Garcia suddenly said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I will personally negotiate with the Morrison family." Colin's heart skipped a beat. He immediately realized that the House of St. Hilda and the Morrison family might have some connections that he did not know about. Even the blood pool under the Morrison family's bell tower, could the House of St. Hilda be aware of it? Thinking about it carefully, the House of St. Hilda married so many noble ladies to the Morrison family. Could it be that they had other motives? Thinking that so many innocent young ladies were unknowingly used as some kind of bloody research tool by the two families, Colin could not help but feel a chill in his heart. However, he also knew that this should involve some unspeakable secrets of the House of St. Hilda. Marquis Garcia obviously did not want him to have too much contact with them. In desperation, Colin nodded and then changed the topic. He told Marquis Vera that Pope Gregory had used magic on her when she was baptized. Marquis Garcia listened quietly and fell into silence again. After a long time, he asked, "Do you know what was the biggest disagreement between Ceres and me?" Colin was stunned. He then realized that the Ceres that Marquis Garcia mentioned was the name of the previous Duke of St. Hilda. It should be the direction of the development of the northern frontier, right? Colin recalled the various conflicts between the two brothers. The Duke wanted to capture the rich but weak eastern region, while you wanted to destroy the Troll Empire. Yes. Marquis Garcia nodded and his face was full of emotion. At this time last year, when we annihilated the 300,000 troll army in the Sky Ice Field, Ceres could no longer hold back his determination to go to the east. For this reason, he did not hesitate to marry Vera to the half-elf kingdom. He wanted to take control of the key to enter the eastern region and at the same time, he also wanted to force me to lead the Black Cavalry to the east. Unfortunately, Mr. Syringe's conspiracy completely disrupted Ceres's plan. Colin was silent. He had personally experienced the matter of Vera marrying into the half-elf kingdom. At that time, he was complacent and thought that he had gained a great advantage. In fact, now that he thought about it, he was just an ignorant chess piece that went with the flow on the chessboard. Ceres wanted to enter the eastern region. In addition to coveting the richness of the eastern region, it was also instigated by the royal family. Marquis Garcia glanced at Colin and asked, "This time, when you went to Imperial Dragon City, Emperor Reinhardt and Empress Medella should have also tried to win you over, right?" Colin nodded and said, "Yes, they really want me to enter the eastern region and cut off the church's biggest support in the secular world." Marquis Garcia stared at Colin's eyes and asked, "What do you think?" Colin looked at Marquis Garcia's serious expression and changed his words. "I think that humans should not kill each other. This will give the other races an opportunity to take advantage of." Marquis Garcia's face showed a gratified smile as he nodded and said, "It's good that you understand. As a knight, the most important character is loyalty. I remember that when we were in Ice Stone City, I once asked you, what is loyalty?" Colin nodded and couldn't help but touch the blade of judgment at his waist. Scenes of the past gradually floated into his mind. Marquis Garcia continued, "Loyalty doesn't mean being loyal to a person, because people's hearts are unpredictable and easy to change. The only thing that is truly worthy of your unlimited loyalty is a certain belief." Belief? Colin mulled over Marquis Garcia's words and seemed to understand something in his heart. A knight's belief is to protect. Marquis Garcia's expression became incomparably sincere. "What I have done in my life is to protect the human race. This is my belief. No matter what happens, no matter where I am, I will always be loyal to it." At this point, Marquis Garcia heavily patted Colin's shoulder and said seriously, "I hope that you can also find a belief that is worthy of your unlimited loyalty. Only in this way will you not be trapped in the endless struggle for power and profit, and lose yourself in the endless struggle for power and profit." Colin looked at Marquis Garcia's pure and fearless eyes and felt the weight on his shoulder. He suddenly understood why this Marquis had spent the first half of his life in the most difficult frontlines of the northern frontier and saw the trolls as his lifelong enemy. So the enmity between him and his brother was because of this. Perhaps, this was a true knight, this was the guardian of the human race. For a moment, Marquis Garcia's stooped figure became tall and big in Colin's eyes. "I understand," Colin said seriously. Marquis Garcia smiled faintly and said, "I have always thought highly of you. Don't disappoint me." After saying this, he turned and walked out of the door. Colin suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Marquis, I am going to implement Scholar Sonny's agricultural reform plan in the northern frontier. In addition, I am also going to borrow." Marquis Garcia waved his hand without looking back and interrupted, "You don't need to tell me about these government affairs. You can do it as you see fit. After all, you are now the guardian of the northern frontier and Vera's husband. You are qualified and obligated to help her manage the northern frontier." "Okay." Colin was secretly relieved. In fact, he did not want to be restrained by Marquis Garcia. Fortunately, the other party did not have such an intention. Then, Colin said, "In addition, I will go to the half-elf kingdom to purchase food next month. I hope that you can help me in the northern frontier." Marquis Garcia turned his head with a mischievous smile on his face. "Queen Aisha is about to give birth, right?" After his real purpose was seen through, Colin smiled awkwardly and nodded. Marquis Garcia did not say anything. After all, he had an illegitimate daughter. Therefore, he did not blame Colin on this issue. "Be careful on the road." Marquis Garcia nodded casually and walked out of the study. "Yes." Chapter 348. Colin pushed open the mahogany door that separated the bedroom from the living room and saw a beautiful figure sitting in front of the dressing table. Her blonde hair was tied up in a loose and casual style, and the silver mirror on the dressing table reflected her delicate face. Coupled with the purple silk nightgown, it highlighted a hazy and lazy charm, making people yearn for the moment when she turned around. "Are you done chatting?" Vera turned around with a charming and sweet smile on her face, and her blue crystal eyes were full of tenderness. For a moment, the whole bedroom seemed to be lit up. "Yes." Colin walked in while unbuttoning the collar of his suit. "Every time I chat with the Marquis, I benefit a lot." "What were you talking about?" "About loyalty and belief." Vera tilted her head and the smile on her face disappeared. When Colin saw this, he thought that she had misunderstood. "So," he explained, "it's not what you think. The Marquis is just sharing his own beliefs and his understanding of loyalty with me. He hopes that I can be inspired and find my own beliefs. Vera's expression eased a little, but she still looked at Colin seriously and said, "In fact, I have always felt that my father's life is too tiring." Colin took off his coat and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his wife's shining eyes and said with a smile, "So, you don't agree with Marquis Garcia's lifelong beliefs?" Vera shook her head and frowned slightly before she said, "My father carries too much on his shoulders, and so does my adoptive father. I know that they are very good people, and in a sense, they can even be called great people, but I don't want you to become like them." Looking at Vera's gentle eyes, Colin's heart was filled with warmth, and he smiled from the bottom of his heart. "Don't worry, I will not become like them. I have my own principles, and I also have my own cherished things, and these are everything that is worth protecting." To be honest, although Colin admired Marquis Garcia's dedication, he did not think that he could be as noble as him. Moreover, he also felt that both Marquis Garcia and the former Duke of St. Hilda were too extreme. He hoped that he would be able to live freely in this life and not be influenced by any power or noble goals. Of course, it might seem easy to achieve this, but it was actually extremely difficult. Without sufficient strength, with Colin's current status and power, it would be impossible for him to live a peaceful life. Therefore, in order to achieve this goal, Colin had to control more forces and obtain more power. Vera smiled sweetly, got up gracefully, and walked towards Colin with graceful steps. The slit on both sides of her nightgown revealed a pair of flawless legs, slender and straight, white and tender. She walked in front of Colin and held his shoulder. She bent her right leg and knelt on the edge of the bed. She bent her beautiful neck and bent her beautiful face. There was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth and her eyes were shining with passion. "Then, am I also someone who is worthy of your protection?" "As my wife, of course you are." Colin said affirmatively as he held Vera's slender waist and felt the warmth and softness in his hands. Vera's eyes became misty and she licked her delicate red lips gently. Her charming appearance made Colin's heart burn with passion. He exerted a little force and pulled the girl onto the big bed. The soft morning sun shone through the crystal skylight at the top of the knight's hall and formed a pure beam of light. The colorful glass reflected the mottled light and shadows. The statues of the 14 paladins of the House of St. Hilda stood on both sides of the hall, as if they were looking at the figures in the hall through the barrier of time. Colin was wearing the Viscount's suit as he walked into the beam of light. He knelt down on one knee in front of the steps and at the same time, raised the blade of judgment high above his head. In front of him, Vera, who was also dressed up, took the blade of judgment with a solemn expression on her face. She then placed the blade of judgment on Colin's shoulder and said in a clear voice, "I, Vera St. Hilda, in the name of the Dukes of the North, confer on Colin Angelo the title of Count of the Empire of Light. From today onwards, the Angeli family will be the hereditary Count of the Empire of Light." Colin clasped his left hand in front of his chest as he raised his head and looked into his wife's bright eyes. "I, Colin Angelo, am willing to devote my loyalty to the respected Dukes of the North. I will protect my people with my life and repay the House of St. Hilda with my glory. I will not let you down." Vera then handed the sword back to Colin before she took out the Count's seal and suit from the servant beside her and gave them to Colin. At this point, the Angeli family's Count conferring ceremony was officially over. The hall was immediately filled with enthusiastic cheers and applause. Although the nobles who came to watch the ceremony were inevitably jealous of this young Count of the Empire, no one dared to be unconvinced. Not to mention that Colin was the husband of the Dukes of the North and the guardian of the northern frontier, just based on his outstanding military achievements in the Northern Frontier Rebellion, he was worthy of the title of Count. No one could deny that in the short span of 2 years, this once obscure baron's son had leaped to become one of the most important figures in the northern region, and even in the empire. Archbishop Akani, who was wearing a white priest's robe, came in front of Colin and drew a holy emblem on her chest. She then revealed a pure and kind smile and said, "May the supreme God of light guide you on your path." Praise the God of light. The two of them looked at each other, and perhaps only the two of them could understand the deep meaning in their eyes. After that, the nobles who came to watch the ceremony came forward to congratulate the new count. When it was Knight Cambanin's turn, Colin suddenly asked in a low voice, "Knight Cambanin, the Duke has appointed Knight Fermi as the new commander of the Golden Lion Legion. You should know about this, right?" Cambanin lowered his head and said in a muffled voice, "Yes, the Duke has mentioned this to me before." "Then you should also understand that this is not the Duke's intention." "I understand. This is the will of the royal family. The Duke does not need to feel embarrassed." "I can understand." "No." Colin reached out and pressed on Knight Cambanin's shoulder as he said in a deep voice, "You are the one that the Duke and I truly trust. Although Knight Fermi is going to be the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, it does not mean that the Duke is relieved to hand over this important army to him." Cambanin's eyes suddenly lit up. He looked up at Colin and asked respectfully, "My lord, what would you like me to do?" Colin smiled faintly, taking advantage of this opportunity to appoint a new legion commander. "His lordship is preparing to make a big adjustment to the officers of the Golden Lion Legion. As for how to make this adjustment, I hope you can give his lordship some suggestions." Cambanin's heart skipped a beat as he immediately understood Colin's meaning. This was clearly an opportunity for him to place his own trusted aides in the Golden Lion Legion. This way, even if Knight Fermi became the commander of the Golden Lion Legion, he would only be a commander without an army. As long as all the middle and lower ranking officers were Knight Cambanin's men, he would be the true commander of the Golden Lion Legion. After understanding this, the haze on Cambanin's face immediately disappeared. He excitedly lowered his voice and said, "Thank you, my lord, for your trust. I will draft a list for you." Colin smiled in relief and patted Knight Cambanin's shoulder again. Knight Cambanin bowed respectfully and retreated. Chapter 349. Winter City. As the most famous tavern in the east of the city, the Butter Tavern declined a large number of patrons today. Why can't we let him in when he can? At the entrance of the tavern, a young drunkard who was stopped by the waiter pointed at the guest who had just been ushered in and questioned. The waiter politely explained, "I'm really sorry, but that gentleman has an invitation." "So, your tavern is booked today?" "Yes." The drunkards immediately clamored to vent their dissatisfaction, but no one dared to rush in. As regular customers of the Butter Tavern, they all knew that the tavern had a deep background. It was said that the owner of the tavern had a close relationship with the noble in the castle at the top of the mountain. In this way, who would dare to cause trouble here? Did they not want to survive in the northern frontier? When the drunkards dispersed, the tavern welcomed two dark-skinned guests. The two of them looked similar and were obviously brothers. Moreover, this kind of dark skin showed that the two of them had been running around for a long time. Coupled with the unconcealable rich but vulgar temperament, the waiter basically judged that the two of them should be traveling merchants all year round and were most likely tonight's guests. Sure enough, one of them took out an invitation and handed it to the waiter. The waiter glanced at it and immediately respectfully opened the door. "Welcome, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Olma." The Oliver brothers immediately walked into the tavern. There were already hundreds of guests gathered inside. Looking around, Oliver found that they were all familiar faces. "Mr. Oliver." Before the two of them could familiarize themselves with the environment, a bunch of people rushed up to greet them. Oliver seemed to have expected such a scene. He immediately put on airs and put on a reserved smile to deal with the people who came forward. Oliver was actually not the organizer of this northern frontier merchant gathering, and the Tulip Chamber of Commerce was not the most powerful force in the northern frontier. Especially after the Oman family suffered a great change, the merchants who knew the ins and outs of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce were no longer optimistic about it. However, this situation suddenly took a 180-degree turn recently. The reason was simple. the merchants discovered that the unknown new president of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Oliver, was actually familiar with Count Angeli. In fact, there were rumors that Oliver and Count Angeli were close for a long time. But recently, Count Angeli deliberately sent a message to the merchants in the northern frontier through Oliver. Only then did everyone finally believe the rumors were true. As a result, Oliver and the Tulip Chamber of Commerce rose overnight. Mr. Oliver, is the House of St. Hilda really planning to borrow money? How much are you going to borrow? Mr. Oliver, will Count Angeli go to Silver Moon City this year to purchase food? Oliver asked. Mr. Oliver, can we ask Count Angeli to increase the tax exemption for the giant demon empire? Mr. Oliver, all sorts of questions came at him, and Oliver didn't know how to answer for a moment. He could only put on a polite smile on his chubby face and pretend that he didn't hear the crowd's questions clearly. He just kept shaking hands with the merchants around him and greeting them. Ding ding. In front of the bar, a middle-aged man with a big belly knocked on the goblet in his hand. He waited for everyone to focus on him before he said in a clear voice, "Everyone, your enthusiasm is scaring Mr. Oliver, so please restrain yourself." Only then did the crowd around Oliver disperse with a smile. To be able to make so many merchants so obedient, this middle-aged man obviously had an extraordinary identity. Mr. Arnold. Oliver took a few quick steps to the front of the bar and shook hands with the man. "Thank you for inviting us to this event." This Mr. Arnold was the organizer of this merchant gathering and the owner of this butter bar. Of course, his more prominent identity was the president of the Northern Wind Chamber of Commerce. This Northern Wind Chamber of Commerce had always had a close relationship with the House of St. Hilda. There were even rumors that this Chamber of Commerce was actually funded and established by the House of St. Hilda. Arnold was just a white glove that was pushed to the front of the stage. Over the years, Arnold had used the name of the House of St. Hilda to call the wind and summon the rain in the Northern Frontier's business world. Now that he was establishing the Northern Frontier Merchant Union, Arnold naturally had hundreds of people responding to his call. Almost all the merchants in the Northern Frontier were present. "Mr. Oliver, Mr. Olma, it is my honor to be able to attend this event. Please take a seat and have a taste of the champagne that I have treasured for many years. Our meeting will begin soon." The Oliver brothers smiled and agreed. They were then led to a round table near the front and sat down. After Arnold's interruption, the merchants came to their senses. This meeting was mainly to discuss the establishment of the Northern Frontier Merchant Union and not the lone gathering of the House of St. Hilda. Thus, they could only suppress the passion in their hearts and stop pestering Oliver. They were prepared to ask him in detail later. After waiting for a while, the door to the bar opened again. A young knight wearing armor and a long sword at his waist walked in. This time, the bar, which had finally quieted down, was once again bustling with noise. The merchants whispered to each other, wondering why a knight would participate in this merchant gathering. However, there were some who recognized the identity of this knight and could not help but turn their gazes to Arnold. At this moment, Arnold quickly stepped forward and personally welcomed the young knight to the stage. At the same time, he spoke to the merchants in a clear voice. "Everyone, please allow me to introduce you. This is the eldest grandson of Senator Seabass of the Senate, Knight Weber St. Hilda." Asterisk clap clap clap. Asterisk warm applause sounded from below the stage. The merchants were excited. The appearance of Knight Weber had confirmed a fact for them: Arnold was indeed closely related to the House of St. Hilda. It seemed that the establishment of the Northern Frontier Merchant Union was the will of the House of St. Hilda. Only the Oliver brothers had strange expressions. They whispered to each other below the stage, occasionally looking in the direction of the bar's entrance. Knight Weber had a reserved smile on his face as he nodded to the merchants below the stage. Actually, he was not willing to come here. This was because when he left Imperial Dragon City, his grandfather Seabass had warned him that he had to keep a low profile in the Northern Frontier and not do anything that could anger Colin. He also did not want to be too close with the Northern Wind Merchant Union. However, the young and hot-blooded Wilbur had never been so submissive before. In addition, the Northern Wind Chamber of Commerce was giving him money and women. Wilbur, who had been sullen for a long time, once again experienced the joy of being a playboy. Thus, he agreed to Arnold's invitation while drunk. In his opinion, participating in a merchants' meeting was just a small matter. It should not attract Colin's attention. Arnold looked at the expressions of the merchants below the stage and felt proud. This time, he had done everything possible to invite Knight Weber to the meeting. He wanted to create an impression in the minds of the merchants of the northern frontier that the House of St. Hilda was behind the Northern Wind Merchant Union. It was because of the banner of the House of St. Hilda that Arnold was able to make a name for himself in the northern frontier. However, the recent changes in the northern frontier were too much for him to take in. Furthermore, the newly risen Count Angeli did not seem to be friendly to the merchants. This was why Arnold had the idea of establishing the Northern Frontier Merchant Union. He wanted to use this opportunity to integrate the merchants of the northern frontier to deal with the changes in the situation. Just as Arnold was in high spirits and was about to give a speech, the door of the tavern opened again. Arnold frowned. He thought that it was that ignorant merchant who was late. He was about to scold him, but when he saw the handsome face of the person who walked in, he was stunned. Knight Weber, who was already seated, immediately stood up. He wiped the beer foam from the corner of his mouth and clasped his left hand on his chest. He stuttered as he saluted the person who came in. Count Angeli. Colin walked into the meeting hall with large strides. He laughed as he walked. Why didn't anyone inform me of such a lively meeting? Chapter 350. Earl. Arnold carefully bowed and greeted him. He suddenly had a bad premonition. Colin came in front of Knight Weber and patted him on the shoulder with a smile, saying, "Knight Weber, I didn't expect you to have so many merchant friends in the northern frontier." Actually, I was only invited by Mr. Arnold to attend the gathering. I don't know anyone else." Knight Weber replied with a stiff expression. He suddenly realized that he had been used by Arnold. Moreover, he had underestimated the importance Colin placed on this gathering of merchants in the northern frontier. After coming to the northern frontier, Knight Weber increasingly felt the power of Colin's influence. This place was not like Imperial Dragon City. It was completely Colin's home ground. Governor Seabass's warning appeared once again. Knight Weber finally made up his mind to withdraw from this quagmire. "Earl, I just remembered that there is an urgent matter that needs to be dealt with. So, please allow me to take my leave." Colin looked at Knight Weber with a smile. Seeing that the other party was afraid, he could not help but feel a little regretful. However, he did not make things difficult for the other party. Instead, he nodded. Knight Weber felt as if he had been pardoned. He did not look at Arnold, who wanted to say something but was hesitating. He hurriedly left. The atmosphere in the tavern suddenly changed. The merchants saw some clues from Knight Weber's miserable escape. They immediately realized that Arnold did not really obtain the support of the House of St. Hilda. At least, the true ruler of the House of St. Hilda, Earl Angeli, was not on Arnold's side. Arnold's heart was in a mess. He did not know what to do. In fact, it was not that he did not consider Colin's attitude. As a merchant who had been in the northern frontier business for decades, Arnold naturally knew the changes in the northern frontier like the back of his hand. Colin's rapid rise caught many people off guard, but Arnold had long noticed this new noble of the northern frontier who was highly appreciated by the Duke of St. Hilda and Marquis Garcia. It was just that Colin had unwittingly stood on the opposite side of the northern frontier merchants due to the Troll Empire's terms of trade and the suppression of food prices. Arnold had also gritted his teeth at Colin for a while, hating him for cutting off his source of income. However, after Vera succeeded in inheriting the Dukes of the North, especially after Governor Seabass bowed his head and admitted defeat. Arnold had no choice but to accept reality and take the initiative to get closer to Colin. First, he sent an expensive enchanted armor to Colin through Senator Seabass as a way to test him. The results were pretty good. Colin received the armor and wore it many times in public. As a result, Arnold let down his guard and thought that Colin had no ill intentions towards the Northern Wind Chamber of Commerce. Who would have thought that the other party would suddenly turn up today without an invitation, and with a menacing look on his face? This time, Arnold was caught off guard. "Mr. Arnold." At this time, Colin turned around and smiled at Arnold, who was standing stiffly at the side. "I hope you don't mind that I came uninvited this time." "Of course not. It is my honor to have you at the Butter Bar." Arnold felt bitter in his heart, but he could only pretend to be flattered on the surface. Colin smiled faintly and said, "Actually, I'm only here to say a few things. I'll leave after I'm done. I won't disturb your gathering." Okay, please speak." Arnold had no choice but to sit down obediently and pass the podium to Colin. Of course, Colin would not be courteous and said loudly, "Everyone, I believe that you have already heard the news from Oliver. The House of St. Hilda is prepared to collect food from all of you by means of loans. I know that you have hoarded a large amount of food and are prepared to take advantage of the rising food prices during this famine to make a fortune. To be honest, I was prepared to collect these food for free." As soon as he said this, the whole place was in an uproar. But immediately, the merchants shut their mouths under Colin's cold gaze. They knew that if they really angered this person in front of them, collecting food for free would really happen. After all, the entire northern frontier was in the hands of Colin and his wife. Even the various lords did not dare to make a sound. What could these merchants without an army dare to do? Colin took in the reactions of the crowd and did not pay much attention to these merchants who were angry but did not dare to speak up. He said this because he wanted to lower the expectations of the merchants so that the following measures would not cause too much of a backlash. However, the benevolent Duke is compassionate and is not willing to take such extreme measures. Colin pushed Vera to be the good guy while he played the role of the bad guy. Sure enough, the merchants immediately praised the Dukes of the North. Colin stretched out his hand and gestured for the crowd to quiet down. He then continued, "However, don't think that you can use this method to make money. I can tell you frankly that in a few days' time, I will personally go to Silvermoon City to purchase food. At that time, a large amount of food will enter the northern frontier market just like last year. Even if the price of food wants to rise, it will not be able to. Also, don't think about going to the half-elf kingdom to purchase food and hoarding it because I have already reached an agreement with Queen Aisha. The half-elf kingdom will only sell food to the House of St. Hilda." The merchants looked at each other and their hearts were beating fast. However, they still believed in Colin's words. After all, the half-elf kingdom's food last year was all bought by Colin alone, and Queen Aisha had even sent the Silvermoon Guard to help Colin guard Icestone City. Therefore, there was no need to doubt Colin's control over the half-elf kingdom. Colin looked at the anxious merchants and his tone softened a little. "Therefore, if you don't want the food in your hands to rot in the warehouse, then you should take this opportunity. This time, the House of St. Hilda will be publicly collecting food. Everyone who is willing to lend their food to the House of St. Hilda will receive a bond of equivalent value." Colin clapped his hands as he spoke. Then, a group of attendants filed in and distributed the bond samples that they had prepared. Arnold also received one and discovered that this so-called bond was made of an unknown material. It was a bit like papyrus, but thinner, whiter, and smoother. The value of the bond was written on the paper. It ranged from £1, £5, £10, to £1,000. Moreover, it also stated that the maturity of the bond was 3 years later and that there would be an interest of 8% per year. Actually, this was a bond that Colin had designed based on the paper money on Earth to be used as a shadow currency. Colin waited for everyone to receive the bond samples before emphasizing, "Anyone, take note, anyone who comes to Lion's Roar Fort with these bonds on the due date can exchange them for food of the same value. Of course, there will also be interest during this period. The merchants held these bonds and began to whisper to each other and discuss. Paper money had yet to appear in this world, so when the merchants looked at these bonds of various denominations, they did not think of the real use of these things. Right now, they were only attracted by the interest of the 8% per year and felt that this was indeed a good deal. If the price of food in the northern frontier continued to rise, the merchants would naturally not be willing to lend their food to the house of St. Hilda. However, Colin had clearly expressed his determination to stabilize the price of food, so the merchants naturally began to calculate the gains and losses. Rather than betting that the house of St. Hilda would not be able to control the price of food, it was better to use the food to exchange for these bonds. At least this was a business that was guaranteed to be profitable. If they continued to hold on to their food and go against the house of St. Hilda, they would definitely offend this murderous Count Angeli in front of them. They were also clear that this young count did not rely on marrying the dukes of the north to obtain his title. He had truly killed his way through the ranks. It could be said that his road to becoming a count was paved with blood and corpses. Count Angeli, please rest assured. Our Northern Wind Merchant Association will definitely take out all of our food and exchange it for these bonds. Arnold was the first to express his stance. This fellow was now only thinking of how to curry favor with Colin, not to mention that this business would not cause him to suffer a loss. With Arnold taking the lead, the rest of the merchants also began to shout out, expressing their willingness to lend their food to the house of St. Hilda. Colin nodded with satisfaction. In fact, he was also clear that although there was profit to be made, it was impossible for these merchants to really take out all of their food. It was estimated that many of them wanted to take out a portion of their food and wait for the situation to develop before considering whether they should continue to use their food to exchange for bonds. However, Colin was not in a hurry. The establishment of a bond's credibility also required a process. He believed that after the first batch of bonds matured and was successfully exchanged, the merchants would believe and recognize the value of these bonds. Finally, they would equate the bonds with food. At that time, Scholar Sonny's new farming and animal husbandry system would gradually be rolled out. The market's demand for currency would also increase, and Colin could also take the opportunity to announce that bonds could be used to pay taxes. This way, the bonds would truly have the function of currency. Moreover, the merchants would gradually discover that these paper bonds were actually more convenient to carry around and trade. Thus, they would be more willing to accept bonds as a substitute currency. In this way, the House of St. Hilda would have the actual right to mint money. Perhaps the imperial family would gradually react, but by that time, the northern frontier would have been completely developed. Colin would not have to worry about the imperial family's questioning. Thinking of this, Colin's mood became more and more carefree. He spoke again, "Thank you for everyone's support. Now, I'll talk about the second matter." He looked around and finally stopped his gaze on Arnold's face. He said with a smile, "Don't worry." He smiled and said, "I'm preparing to establish a Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. If everyone is willing, they can invest in it." Chapter 351. The Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. Hearing such a new term coming out of Colin's mouth, the merchants were confused and looked at each other in dismay. Arnold, who was being stared at by Colin, suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of panic. "Weren't you complaining that the preferential tax policy I agreed on with the Troll Empire wasn't extended to the entire northern frontier?" Faced with Colin's questioning, the group of merchants immediately shook their heads like a rattledrum, expressing that they had absolutely no complaints. Colin smiled faintly, not intending to pursue the matter. He continued, "Thus, I intend to establish a foreign trade company that will be in charge of the northern frontier's foreign trade. From now on, apart from this company, no individual or merchant group on the northern frontier will be allowed to engage in foreign trade." Colin's words were like poking a hornet's nest, causing the entire venue to become restless. "Count, are you joking? Count, you can't do this. Count, you'll ruin the business world of the northern frontier." At this moment, the merchants no longer cared about the difference in status and all expressed their opposition to this proposal. After all, the profits from foreign trade were plentiful, so how could the merchants give it up? For these benefits, they would be willing to go to the gallows, let alone resist Colin. Colin calmly extended his hands and gestured for the merchants to calm down. After the crowd calmed down, Colin continued, "Don't get agitated. I'm not trying to cut off everyone's source of income, but I want to unify everyone's strength and develop the northern frontier's foreign trade better. I don't want to monopolize this trading company, but everyone can invest in it. At the end of each year, the company will distribute the profits according to everyone's investment." This was actually a joint stock company, but it was still something new in this world. When the merchants heard that they could at least get a share of the profits from foreign trade, they no longer objected and began to ask Colin a few details. Colin patiently gave answers. "Count, may I ask who will be in charge of this company?" "The company will belong to the House of St. Hilda, of course. His Lordship will appoint a management team to manage the company. In addition, every investor would become a director of the company, and all the directors would form a board of directors. You can think of this board of directors as an institution similar to the Senate. According to the proportion of investment, each director has different speaking rights. The board of directors can't interfere with the company's daily operations, but some of the company's major decisions, such as the changes to the core members of the company's management team, the implementation of large-scale transactions, accounting audits, and so on, have to go through the board of directors." Colin was prepared to firmly control the company's personnel and management rights, but some other rights, such as supervision and suggestion rights, could be distributed to the businessmen who invested. This was necessary. Otherwise, no businessman would be willing to hand over their money to an organization that was completely out of their control. This Otherworld East India Company, that Colin had high hopes for, would never be able to grow. That's right. In fact, the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company that Colin set up was based on the East India Company on Earth. The wonderful use of this company would gradually manifest itself in the future. In the future, all of your goods will be sold to the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company, and the company will sell them overseas. If you want to buy goods overseas, you can also place an order with the company, and the company will purchase them overseas. This way, the Northern Frontier business will be a whole when it comes to external trade. We will advance and retreat together, and have a greater bargaining power when it comes to external trade. Don't you think so? After hearing this, the businessmen's faces were filled with yearning. They also began to realize that this novel company would become a giant in the business world of the Northern Frontier, and every businessman would be under the protection of this giant's wings. This would definitely be much better than fighting alone. Colin looked at the change in the expressions of the people and felt proud. In fact, the main reason he set up this company was to control this company and complete the integration and control of the business world of the Northern Frontier. For the Northern Frontier Businessmen's Association that Arnold wanted to set up, this was actually a plan to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. Arnold seemed to have understood this point, and at this moment, his face became abnormally pale. He knew that there was no need to set up the Northern Frontier Businessmen's Association that he had been planning for a long time. Even if it was set up, it would only be an empty shell. In the foreseeable future, the one that would truly control the Northern Frontier business world would definitely be this Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. Arnold suddenly felt disheartened. He did not understand how such a young noble like Colin could have such plans and methods. In front of him, he was just a clown jumping around randomly. "Mr. Arnold." Colin suddenly called out Arnold's name. "Yes, Count Arnold." Arnold quivered and quickly stood up. "What do you think of this foreign trade company? What can I do? Can I say no?" Arnold roared in his heart, but on the surface, he had a shocked expression and praised exaggeratedly, "Count Arnold, I think this is really a genius creation. As long as you don't object, our Northern Wind Chamber of Commerce is willing to invest 1.8 million gold coins to join the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. Colin raised his eyebrows and praised Arnold's decisiveness. This was a smart person who understood the situation. Knowing that he could not resist, he decisively joined. And once he made up his mind, it was a huge investment. The merchants attending the meeting were also shocked by Arnold's straightforwardness. The merchants who were still doubtful immediately expressed their willingness to invest in the meeting, as if they were afraid that they would lose this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity if they were a step too slow. Actually, it was obvious that this new company was about to monopolize all foreign trade in the northern frontier. If any merchant did not join, they would gradually be marginalized by the northern frontier business world. Very good. Everyone's enthusiasm has amazed me. I believe that this Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company that is about to be established will definitely be a great success. Colin clapped his hands and smiled at Arnold. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Sorry for disturbing your gathering. I'll take my leave now. You can continue. After saying that, Colin strode out without the slightest hesitation. But on the way, he gave the Oliver brothers a look. The Oliver brothers immediately understood and stood up to bid farewell to the crowd. They chased after Colin's back and ran out of the tavern, leaving behind the envious merchants. They were all very clear that the Oliver brothers would definitely hold an important position in the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. Many people had already begun to secretly plan to build a good relationship with the Oliver brothers. Perhaps in the future, they would also be able to obtain a position in the company. Arnold looked at the absent-minded merchants and suddenly felt dispirited. He stood foolishly in front of the stage, but no one looked at him. No one even asked if the Northern Frontier Merchants Association was still going to be established. Arnold drank all the red wine in his cup and sighed. He lowered his head and no one knew what he was thinking. Chapter 352. Under the bright moonlight, Colin left the Butter Tavern and returned to the Lion's Roar Castle. Oliver and his brother followed closely behind and entered the castle's study. The three of them took their seats, and the maid quietly served them drinks and desserts before leaving quietly. Colin took a sip of his coffee and smiled at the two slightly reserved men. Now do you know why I'm looking for you? Oliver quickly straightened his back, suppressed the excitement in his heart, and nodded, yes, Sir Count, I can roughly guess. Colin looked into Oliver's eyes and said in a deep voice, originally, I wanted to force you to be the president of the Northern Frontier Merchants Association, but later on, I came up with a better plan. Therefore, I'll leave that association to Oliver. As for you, after the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company is officially established, His Lordship will appoint you as the company's general manager and be in charge of the company's daily operations. Although he had already guessed it in his heart, Oliver was so excited that he almost could not control himself after hearing Colin's confirmation. He patted his chest loudly and expressed his determination to Colin, thank you, Sir Count, for your trust. I will definitely do my best to manage this company for you and the House of St. Hilda. Colin nodded with satisfaction and continued, I have already discussed with Count Oman. The Tulip Chamber of Commerce will be incorporated into the new company, and all the assets of the Chamber of Commerce will be converted into company shares. This way, you will also have a seat on the board of directors. Yes. Oliver nodded. He naturally had no objections to such an arrangement. Although he was the president of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Commerce was actually an asset of the Oman family. Oliver was just a manager pushed to the front. The Tulip Chamber of Commerce was about to become history, but the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company represented a glorious future waiting for him. Oliver naturally had no complaints. Sir Count, there is a question I don't know if I should ask. After the initial excitement, Oliver carefully asked. Colin seemed to see through Oliver's doubts and asked, are you worried about the board of directors? Yes. Oliver nodded. Sir, Arnold has a lot of assets and a high reputation in the northern frontier. If he robs a large number of businessmen to invest in our new company, will the board of directors fall under his control? Colin glanced at Oliver and asked in a questioning tone, if Arnold can rope in other merchants, can't you do the same? Don't tell me that your prestige isn't as high as Arnold's. With my support, your influence in the northern frontier's business world is definitely not lower than Arnold's. What's more, you also have the right to make suggestions for the management team of the new company. If you make good use of this, you will definitely be able to attract a large number of northern frontier businessmen. If you can let Arnold control the board of directors like this, then you deserve to be held back by him in the future. When Oliver heard this, he hurriedly declared loudly, Lord Count, please rest assured. I will definitely make good use of the new company's management team and rope in a group of powerful northern frontier businessmen. I will definitely not let the board of directors fall into Arnold's hands. Colin's expression softened slightly as he encouraged, don't worry and do it boldly. Don't let me down. In fact, even if Oliver's funds were not as good as Arnold's, Colin still had a way to back him up. The House of St. Hilda, the Angeli family, the Schultz family, and the half-elven Royal Miller family could all provide financial support when Colin needed it. Moreover, Colin still had 2 war reparations in his hands. One came from the Troll Empire, and the other came from the Menham family. This was a huge sum of more than 10 million gold coins. No other company could take out so much liquid capital at once. Right now, the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company was only in its embryonic form. Although many far-sighted businessmen could see its potential, they were definitely not as confident as Colin. Therefore, the businessmen would definitely not invest too much. Colin was confident enough to control the board of directors. He controlled the company's management team and the board of directors. This way, the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company would not be able to escape from Colin's hands. With this as a starting point, Colin would be able to integrate and control the Northern Frontier business community. He could even use it as a special weapon for external expansion. That's right, Colin was prepared to teach the people of this world a lesson. He wanted them to know that war was not only a form of military invasion, but also an economic invasion. It was harder to detect, but its destructive power was definitely not inferior to a military invasion. After explaining to Oliver, Colin turned to look at Olma, who was sitting at the side. Olma saw Colin's gaze and hurriedly revealed a flattering smile. Colin also had arrangements for Oliver's brother. He smiled and said, Mr. Olma, I'm going to set up a charity foundation. I wonder if you're willing to help me manage it. Olma originally thought that he could take advantage of his younger brother and become an executive of the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. However, he did not expect Colin to have other arrangements for him. However, Olma was confused as to what this charity foundation was. Although he did not understand, Olma definitely would not reject Colin's request. He immediately replied loudly, of course. Your Excellency, I'm willing to serve you with any requests. Colin nodded in satisfaction. He seemed to have thought of something, and his gaze became extremely deep. Very good. This charity foundation is not a profit-driven organization, but its importance is no less than that of the Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company. Olma perked up and immediately asked, Your Excellency, what is the main purpose of this charity foundation? There have been many wars in the northern frontier in the past 2 years, creating a large number of people who need help. For example, farmers who have lost their fields, disabled veterans, elderly people who have no one to take care of them, homeless children, and so on. The Church of Glory's help alone is not enough for these people. That's why I want to set up this charity foundation to help these poor civilians. Your Excellency, your benevolence is more dazzling than the sun. Olma praised loudly before carefully asking, however, how should we settle the source of funds for the charity foundation? The foundation accepts donations from anyone. Nobles, merchants, and even rich farmers can contribute to this. However, these donations alone are not enough. Therefore, the foundation needs to issue a welfare lottery. Welfare lottery? Olma repeated this new term and waited for Colin's explanation. That's right. Colin picked up a piece of paper from the desk and handed it to Olma. At the same time, he explained, this is the template for the welfare lottery. It's made of special paper and cannot be counterfeited. There's a string of numbers written on it, and the price is 10 copper coins. Colin gave a general explanation of the distribution method of the lottery. The two brothers, who had been in the business world for many years, immediately realized the business opportunity. Olma's eyes lit up as he praised, Your Excellency. This is really a genius idea. I'm sure that the welfare lottery will definitely be popular in the northern frontier and raise a lot of money for the charity foundation. Colin smiled faintly and accepted Olma's flattery. However, he believed that the two brothers in front of him would not understand the true meaning behind his charity foundation. His move was actually targeted at the Church of Glory. Why did the church have such great appeal among the people? The quota to be baptized as a knight was too precious and had nothing to do with the civilians. On the other hand, the promise of entering the kingdom of heaven after death was too illusory and intangible. As for the protection of God, there had not been any miracles in this world for thousands of years. The reason why the Church of Glory could have such great influence among the people, other than providing spiritual sustenance for the civilians, there was another very important reason: charity. The tithes, collected by the church, other than to maintain the normal operations of the organization, were mostly used to relieve the civilians at the bottom. To the civilians, this was a real benefit and the most important reason why they believed in the God of Glory. In Colin's view, this was actually a welfare system. However, this welfare system was actually controlled by the church. It was no wonder that the Lord's prestige among the people at the bottom could not compete with the church. In order to support this welfare system, a large amount of money would definitely be needed. With the current situation in the northern frontier, if he rashly increased taxes, the people would definitely be angry. Of course, Colin would not be so unwise. Therefore, he thought of using the lottery to accumulate wealth. Of course, the lottery was also a kind of tax, an IQ tax. This time, when he set up the charity foundation, Colin started from the foundation of the church and snatched the support of the people at the bottom. If the royal family wanted to limit the power of the church when it came to fighting against the church, then Ajani and Mr. Kong were bent on destroying the source of the church's faith from top to bottom by starting with, God is dead. Then, Colin was prepared to start with charity and gradually corrode the foundation of the church. In fact, Colin did not dislike the existence of the church. He recognized the God of Glory's protection of the human race and felt that the people did indeed need a spiritual sustenance. However, he could not tolerate the clergy using the name of the God of Glory for personal gain, and he could not tolerate the Pope's idea of using Vera. Since he would have to face the church sooner or later, Colin wanted to prepare early. Moreover, building a welfare system that he could control was actually part of Colin's plan to centralize power. Yes, centralize power. In Colin's opinion, the current feudal system in the Empire of Light was actually very inefficient and had a great risk of internal friction. It was far more convenient to rule than a centralized system. Of course, there were still many things that needed to be done in order to establish a centralized ruling system. Colin was currently laying some foundation. Colin would certainly not talk about these things with the two businessmen. Even Vera would not know that Colin had such a crazy idea in his mind. Well, you can go and prepare yourselves. Let me know if you need anything. Yes, Earl. Chapter 353. At the Butter Tavern. The merchants had left, leaving Arnold alone in his seat as he downed cup after cup of wine. This gathering, which Arnold had high hopes for, could be said to be a complete failure. Although he had successfully established the Northern Region Merchants' Union after Colin's departure and even became its president, Arnold knew very well that his Northern Region Merchants' Union was nothing but a joke, judging from the absent-minded and perfunctory attitude of the merchants. Fear, confusion, anger, and unwillingness, various emotions flashed across his face. This merchant who had once commanded the winds and rains of the northern frontier was now exuding an indescribable desolation. With a creak, the tavern door opened. Arnold squinted his eyes and looked back, only to see Knight Webb walk in. "Since you left, why did you come back?" Arnold's tone was full of unconcealable mockery. However, just as he finished speaking, Arnold noticed that there was someone following behind Knight Webb. After seeing the person's face, Arnold sobered up and stood up from his seat. He bowed and said, "Earl of Avon, I didn't expect to see you in chilly Winter Castle." The Earl of Avon laughed as he walked in and said, "Why? Am I not welcomed at the northern frontier?" "Of course not. I'm just surprised." Arnold poured a cup of wine for the Earl of Avon and asked, "Are you going to the northern frontier?" The Earl of Avon was attracted by the wine on the table. He didn't answer Arnold's question. Instead, he lifted the wine cup and sniffed it before taking a sip. He closed his eyes and savored the taste for a long time. Finally, he exhaled deeply and praised. "Not bad. The wine of the Winst Manor won't disappoint." Arnold hurriedly flattered, "Lord Earl, you really are someone who understands wine. I still have a lot of treasures in my wine cellar. If you are willing, I would like you to appraise them for me." The Earl of Avon raised his eyebrows, looking very tempted. However, he suppressed the desire in his heart and sat down at the bar counter. "I came to the northern frontier as a private individual, so I hope you won't reveal my whereabouts." Of course, I won't speak carelessly." Arnold's heart stirred as he tried to guess the reason why the Earl of Avon came to Winter Castle. It was no secret in the Radiance Empire that the eastern and northern frontier did not get along. Therefore, Arnold immediately realized that the second son of the Duke of the Eastern region had suddenly met him secretly under the leadership of Knight Wilbur. He was afraid that Wilbur had other motives. However, this was also an opportunity for him. What happened tonight made Arnold understand that Count Angeli was determined to take over the business world of the northern frontier. Unfortunately, the representative of the business world that Count Angeli wanted was not him. This disappointed Arnold and angered him. However, the appearance of the Earl of Avon gave him a glimmer of hope. While he was thinking, the Earl of Avon had already finished the wine in his glass. Arnold hurriedly continued it himself. At the same time, he heard the Earl of Avon say, "I heard that Count Angeli wants to set up a foreign trade company in the northern frontier." "Yes, Lord Earl." "Then, Mr. Arnold, do you intend to invest in this company?" "Of course. Lord Earl, I have to join. Otherwise, it won't be long before my name is no longer heard in the business world of the northern frontier." The Earl of Avon nodded and expressed his understanding, but at the same time, he suggested, "Mr. Arnold, I don't know much about the specific operation of this new company. However, I think you can start from the board of directors that is similar to the Senate." Arnold rolled his eyes and said, "You mean, I can try to control the board of directors?" "Yes. You can give it a try. With your prestige in the business world of the northern frontier, it won't be difficult to win over a group of businessmen and get a certain amount of say in the board of directors." "Thank you for your suggestion. I will try to do it." Arnold thanked him, but he didn't think so in his heart. In his view, this Northern Frontier Foreign Trade Company was so important. How could Count Angeli let the control of the board of directors fall into someone else's hands? The House of St. Hilda didn't mind if the major businessmen invested in this new company to have a certain amount of shares and share a part of the profits. However, if someone really didn't know what was good for them and tried to snatch the control of the company from the House of St. Hilda, did they really think that those nobles wouldn't kill them? The Earl of Avon seemed to see through Arnold's doubts. He smiled and asked, "Mr. Arnold, are you worried that this will lead to the retaliation of the House of St. Hilda? Arnold looked at the young face of the Earl of the Eastern region and thought about his current awkward situation and gloomy future. He couldn't help but nodded and said frankly, yes. The Earl of Avon laughed and comforted him, you don't have to worry about this. The northern frontier doesn't belong to Vera and Colin alone. When he heard the Earl of Avon's words, Arnold's heart moved. He eagerly asked, Earl, please forgive me for being stupid. I can't understand what you mean. However, the Earl of Avon was only focused on drinking and didn't answer Arnold's question. Just as Arnold was getting anxious, Knight Wilbur, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, Mr. Arnold, haven't you heard that young Master Joyce and Princess Judy have been getting along well recently? Huh? Young Master Joyce? Arnold wanted to say that the position of the Dukes of the North had already been decided. Could young Master Joyce still cause any trouble? However, Arnold immediately realized that if young Master Joyce could really marry Princess Judy and get the support of the royal family, then he might really be able to get out of the current awkward situation. Arnold's eyes swept across the faces of Knight Wilbur and the Earl of Avon, and his heart suddenly became excited. If the royal family, Governor Seabass, and the Eastern region all supported Joyce, then even if he couldn't become the Dukes of the North, he would definitely be able to form a force in Coldwinter City that could compete with the Dukes of the North. In that case, wouldn't he be able to seek refuge? Seeing Arnold's eyes gradually brightening, the Earl of Avon smiled faintly and said, Mr. Arnold, are you confident now? Arnold suppressed the excitement in his heart and said in a deep voice, I wonder if you can arrange for me to meet young Master Joyce. Knight Wilbur nodded reservedly and said, if the time is right, I will arrange it. The Earl of Avon encouraged again, Mr. Arnold, if you need financial support, the House of St. Prospero may be able to provide some help. Thank you very much. Arnold hurriedly thanked him. But don't be too happy. The Earl of Avon reminded him, the House of St. Prospero's financial help is definitely limited. After all, it is difficult for me to convince my father to invest a large sum of money in a company in the northern frontier. Moreover, if you suddenly take out a large sum of money of unknown origin, I'm afraid it will arouse Count Angeli's vigilance. I understand. At this time, Arnold had regained his fighting spirit and said confidently, please believe in my appeal in the business circle of the northern region for so many years. How can Oliver, that little brat, beat me? The Earl of Avon also laughed and said, haha. I think so too. Count Angeli has indeed misjudged him. After finishing the main topic, Arnold immediately sent out an invitation, Count Angeli, do you have time to taste my collection of good wine? The Earl of Avon's eyes lit up and he nodded repeatedly, good. I believe you won't let me down. Chapter 354. At the beginning of September, the weather in Winter Castle was already a little cold. The early autumn breeze swept across the lush green plains, bringing with it a hint of bleakness. Winter Castle was actually a place with mountains and water, but this water area was not in the city, but outside the city. Therefore, it could barely be described as a crouching tiger and coiling dragon. Colin left Winter Dungeon and traveled south for about 10 kilometers before he saw Agate Lake. A gentle breeze passed over the Agate Lake, stirring up layers of ripples. Carps of various colors were swimming freely in the lake, but they were immediately frightened by the sound of horse hooves by the lakeside. They scattered and disappeared into the bottom of the lake. After walking along the lake for a while, the outline of a manor appeared in front of them. Colin did not speed up. Instead, he leisurely admired the scenery by the lake. Not long after, the group entered the manor of the House of St. Hilda by Agate Lake. Colin asked the servant who was leading the horse, where are the two princes? Earl, the two princes are learning horsemanship at the racecourse. Colin nodded, turned the horse around, and rode towards the racecourse. Actually, as the teacher of Prince Harrison and Princess Judy, Colin should be the one teaching them horsemanship. However, Colin was too busy to have the time. Therefore, he let the instructor of the House of St. Hilda do it for him. At least in Colin's opinion, the instructor of the House of St. Hilda was actually more suitable than him to teach the two princes. When he arrived at the racecourse, Colin saw a few thin but vigorous figures galloping on the grass from afar. Colin sat down in the pavilion, and the young maidservant hurriedly served him freshly squeezed orange juice and a small plate of ice. It was the end of summer. Although it was already cold, outdoor sports were still hot and stuffy. Colin poured the ice into the cup and sipped it. "Teacher." The two princes also noticed Colin's arrival and waved at him from afar. Colin smiled and waved back at them. However, he noticed that other than the instructor, Prince Harrison, and Princess Judy, there was another one in the racecourse, Joyce. He immediately narrowed his eyes. Seeing that Colin had arrived, the instructor tactfully ended today's lesson as soon as possible. The three princes jogged to the pavilion and bowed to Colin. Joyce was the last to arrive. He looked at Colin somewhat evasively. Colin looked down on his guilty conscience. To be honest, among the three sons of the previous Duke of St. Hilda, Colin had the deepest impression of Charles. Originally, he also appreciated the eldest son of the Duke the most. Unfortunately, because of his resentment towards his father, he actually wanted to collude with the trolls and betray the northern frontier. In the end, he was seen through by Colin and turned into a blood slave. Colin had only met the second son, Adams, once. However, at that time, Adams had directly received a boxed lunch. Therefore, Colin did not have much of an impression of him. As for the youngest son, Joyce, Colin now felt that it was more and more difficult for this kid to become a great person. This was not because Joyce had tried to compete with Vera for the position of the Dukes of the North. Colin was afraid of him and deliberately looked down on him. It was because this kid's performance was really not smart enough in Colin's opinion. What was Joyce trying to do by pursuing Princess Judy so eagerly? Did he really think that if he married Princess Judy, he would be able to change his life? Moreover, he did it so obviously and without any concealment. Did he really think that Colin was blind? In fact, if Joyce could honestly stay in the Lion's Roar castle and eat and play, Colin was willing to give him a plain and stable life for Vera's sake. However, if he was not willing to be stable and wanted to jump around randomly, then he could not blame Colin for being ruthless. "Teacher, you are really incompetent." Judy's clear and slightly spoiled voice pulled Colin back to reality. The Empire's princess was wearing a tight suit that was convenient for riding a horse today. Her soft hair was tied into a ponytail, and when she trotted over, it was very cute. "How am I incompetent?" Colin lazily leaned on the recliner and asked with a smile. "You don't teach us equestrian skills personally. Didn't I find a more suitable instructor for you guys? Everyone has their own strengths, and I can't teach you everything." "Then what are you really good at?" I'm good at beating bad guys." "Beating bad guys?" Princess Judy took the towel handed by the maid and was stunned for a moment. Then she smiled and shouted, "Then I also want to learn how to beat bad guys from you." Colin glanced at Judy, who had thin arms and legs, and deliberately made a disdainful look, and said, "You'd better take a bath first and change your clothes." The little girl snorted, but still ran to take a bath obediently. "Earl, then I will also take my leave first." Joyce immediately opened his mouth and said. Colin glanced at him lightly and nodded, "Okay." When only Prince Harrison was left in the pavilion, Colin asked with a smile, "Why don't you take a bath?" After this period of contact, Prince Harrison could see that Colin was actually not difficult to get along with, so he was not as restrained as he was at the beginning. "Teacher, I recently saw that the Bloody Cavalry is reorganizing their armaments. Are you going to battle again?" Colin drank the cold and refreshing orange juice, shook his head, and said, "Not really. I'm going to the Half-Elf Kingdom, and the Bloody Cavalry will be the escort mission." "So, teacher, are you here to say goodbye to us this time?" "Yes." Harrison was shocked, and then he plucked up his courage and asked, "Teacher, can you take me with you?" Colin wanted to refuse, but looking at Harrison's eager eyes, he smiled and said, "If you can guess what I'm going to do, I'll take you with me." Prince Harrison scratched his head and pondered for a moment. Suddenly he had an idea, and said, "You are going to beat bad guys." Colin laughed and said, "Do you know what a bad guy is?" "Of course I know. As long as they are a threat to us, they are all bad guys." Prince Harrison clenched his fists and responded rather domineeringly. Colin looked at this prince with a smile, and asked, "Then do you think there are bad guys in this agate manor?" Prince Harrison seemed to be a little hesitant, but he still nodded and said, "Yes." "Who?" "Joyce." Colin narrowed his eyes and looked at Harrison carefully. Unconsciously, Colin's mouth slightly curved, and he asked again, "Why is he a bad guy?" "Because, he wants to get something that doesn't belong to him." Colin put down the mug in his hand and sat up straight. This prince of the empire finally aroused his interest. So, he reached out to hold Harrison's shoulder, stared into his eyes with bright eyes, and asked in a deep voice, "Well, since you think Joyce is a bad guy, then tell me, what should I do?" Prince Harrison trembled slightly under Colin's deep eyes, but deep in his heart, there was a strong impulse trying to break out of the shell. He knew that this was his teacher's test for him. Therefore, the young imperial prince growled in a childish voice, "Don't worry. Bad guys deserve to be punished." The smile on Colin's face became even brighter. He reached out to pinch Prince Harrison's shoulder and said in a bewitching tone, "Very well. Then let me see what you are capable of." Prince Harrison pursed his lips and nodded vigorously. "Teacher, I won't let you down." After saying that, Prince Harrison bowed and ran off. Colin looked at the other's departing figure, his eyes shining. He really wanted to see what this prince was capable of. If he was to his liking, perhaps Colin would be willing to sincerely accept this student. Chapter 355. The tranquil night shrouded the earth, and the chirping of insects embellished this quiet little garden with exuberant vitality. Colin looked at the bright moon in the sky and tasted the flower tea in his hand as he waited quietly. He was waiting for the surprise that Prince Harrison would bring him. He had come to Agate Manor this time for Joyce. Although he had never treated this child as a real threat, Colin was about to leave the northern frontier for a period of time, and he felt uncomfortable leaving such a hidden danger in chilly Winter Castle. Moreover, Colin had received reports from his subordinates that the Earl of Avon of the Eastern region was in chilly Winter Castle. However, he did not reveal his identity and did not visit Lion's Roar Fort. Colin knew that he had come to the northern frontier to look for Prince Rhy. After all, the Earl of Avon was accompanied by the prince's daughter, Shalia. However, since they had come to chilly Winter Castle, it would be rude if they did not visit the Dukes of the North at Lion's Roar Fort. This made Colin feel that the scheming Earl of Avon was plotting something, so he did not dare to visit Lion's Roar Fort. Therefore, Colin had to nip this hidden danger in the bud before he left. As the night deepened, Colin was wondering why Prince Harrison had not made a move. Was he afraid at the last moment? At this moment, a servant rushed into the garden and reported anxiously. "Lord Earl, something has happened. It's finally here." Colin's heart skipped a beat, and he asked calmly, "What's wrong?" "Young Master Joyce, you should make a trip there yourself." Looking at the servant's hesitant expression, Colin rolled his eyes and quickly got up. "Let's go." "Yes." The two of them walked through the dark corridor and arrived at the backyard of the manor. The place was already surrounded by guards and servants, but they stood outside and did not dare to enter. When he saw Colin striding over, the manor's butler hurriedly went up to him and said respectfully, "My lord, Prince Harrison, Princess Judy, and young Master Joyce are all inside. There seems to be some conflict. Please go in and take a look." "Conflict?" Colin's expression changed slightly as he asked doubtfully. The butler didn't elaborate any further. He just used his eyes to signal to Colin that it wasn't convenient for this matter to be made public. Colin didn't ask any more questions and strode into the room. There were only 3 little ones in the room, and no one else. Princess Judy sat at the table, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She was not in good spirits. On either side of her, Prince Harrison and Joyce stood facing each other. Their faces were flushed red as if they had just quarreled. There was a flip chest set on the table, which the 3 of them had probably been playing earlier. However, the atmosphere in the room was very solemn. Seeing Colin walk in, Prince Harrison's eyes lit up. He hurriedly yelled, "Count Angeli, this Joyce actually dared to molest Sister Judy. Quickly send someone to, nonsense." Joyce retorted with a sharp voice, "You're slandering me. I clearly didn't do anything." "What slandering? When I came in just now, I clearly saw that you were plotting against Judy." "You saw wrong. I was just checking on the princess. Why did she suddenly lie on the table?" "Enough." Colin raised his hand to interrupt the 2 boys' argument. He then looked at Princess Judy and asked with concern, "Judy, are you all right?" "I." Princess Judy rubbed her eyes and yawned. "I'm fine. I'm just a bit sleepy." Colin frowned. He walked up and picked up the cup in front of Princess Judy. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. Prince Harrison immediately yelled, "Count Angeli, I suspect that Joyce put a drug in the water. Quickly get a potion master to examine it." Joyce was shocked. He yelled, "Nonsense. How could I put drugs in the princess' water?" Colin was a bit speechless. He had already smelled that there was something wrong with Princess Judy's water. He immediately guessed that it was Harrison who had drugged it and wanted to frame Joyce. However, this method was too crude. Well, he was still a child after all. It was difficult for him to come up with such a perfect plan. Colin was just thinking about how to help Prince Harrison smooth over this plan when he heard Prince Harrison yell again. "You still want to deny it? Count Angeli, quickly look at Judy's neck. There are traces left by this Joyce." Joyce was obviously surprised. Colin also blinked. Clearly, he didn't expect this kid to have such a trick up his sleeve. He immediately walked up to Judy and asked, "Judy, is there something wrong with your neck?" Princess Judy seemed to have realized that something was wrong. She rubbed her neck and said in a daze, "It seems a bit itchy." Colin pulled open Judy's collar and saw that there was indeed a red patch on her neck. Prince Harrison immediately yelled proudly, "Joyce, are you still going to deny it?" I didn't do anything." Joyce's face turned red. He yelled in a wrong tone, "Count Angeli, this is all Harrison's doing. You mustn't believe him." Prince Harrison was not going to let him go. He said step by step, "Joyce, it's obvious now. There's no point in denying it. You used the excuse of playing chess to trick Judy into coming here. Then, you put drugs in her cup. You wanted to take advantage of the situation to do something bad." "Nonsense. I didn't. I didn't." Joyce just kept shaking his head in denial. He couldn't produce any concrete evidence to prove his innocence. Prince Harrison, on the other hand, had a smug look on his face. He seemed to think that he had obtained irrefutable evidence. Looking at this familiar scene, Colin suddenly thought of the similar framing incident that happened in the Holy Light Church in Imperial Dragon City. Perhaps this was what they meant by like father, like son. Of course, compared to the framing methods of Emperor Reinhardt and Empress Medela, Harrison's method was too naive and could be easily seen through. For example, the marks on Judy's neck. Colin had already seen some undetectable catkins on her collar. However, this method was enough to deal with a brat like Joyce. Looking at him now, it was obvious that he was panicking. "Count Angeli, quickly get someone to arrest this Joyce. How can he profane the princess of the royal family?" I didn't. Joyce gave a feeble retort. Tears were welling up in his eyes. He was actually about to cry. Colin was secretly disdainful. He didn't do as Prince Harrison said and arrest Joyce. Instead, he said vaguely, this matter needs to be investigated further. However, young Master Joyce, you should return to the Lion's Roar Castle first. Agate Manor is no longer suitable for you. Joyce obviously didn't expect Colin to let him go just like that. He nodded repeatedly and thanked him. Count Angeli, you must investigate carefully. This matter really wasn't done by me. After saying that, he glared at Prince Harrison and ran out as if he was escaping. Prince Harrison stomped his feet anxiously and complained, Teacher, why did you let him go just like that? Colin ignored Harrison and asked Judy, Judy, how are you now? Do you need me to get a priest to take a look at you? Before Judy could say anything, Prince Harrison muttered softly, I'm fine. I'll be fine after a nap. Colin glared fiercely at Harrison, then picked up the groggy Judy and placed her on the bed in the inner room. After giving a few more instructions to the maidservant outside, he turned to Prince Harrison and said, Don't worry. Come with me. Chapter 356. The night was getting darker. The hazy moonlight shone on the quiet forest path. Prince Harrison followed behind Colin with his head lowered. However, his cheeks were puffed up, and he looked a little indignant. Do you feel that I ruined your plan? Colin did not even turn his head, but it was as if he could already see Harrison's expression. Prince Harrison did not say anything in a fit of pique. He only nodded. Colin's lips curled up slightly, and he calmly said, Do you know that sometimes, it's best to carry out the plan halfway? Prince Harrison raised his head in surprise, a look of confusion on his face. Colin suddenly stopped in his tracks. He stared at Harrison's pupils with a piercing gaze, and suddenly asked, Princess Judy is allergic to catkins, right? Ah. What? Harrison was shocked. He was caught off guard, and his eyes darted around. His words also became stammering. Colin chuckled, and said, You still want to frame Joyce like this? If you really make a big deal out of it, are you sure you won't reveal anything when you're questioned? Harrison lowered his head, and he was also a little discouraged. He was probably dealt a blow. Colin did not say anything to comfort this overly immature prince of the empire. He only calmly continued, Your framing method is too shallow, and there are too many loopholes. So, I'm actually letting Joyce go for your own good. Are we going to let Joyce go just like that? But he's really annoying. Harrison mumbled softly. There was still a hint of indignation in his tone. Colin reached out to hold Harrison's shoulder. He stared into his eyes, and said, Harrison, remember, don't let your emotions cloud your mind at any time. That will only make you become extreme, and you might even forget your original goal. Harrison looked up at Colin, and nodded as if he understood. Colin continued to ask, Do you remember what our original goal was? Original goal? Harrison thought for a while, and said, It was to punish Joyce and make him stop trying to get close to Judy. In that case, is there a need for us to convict Joyce? Huh? Harrison looked at Colin in confusion, clearly not understanding what he meant. Colin explained with a smile, Your story is full of loopholes. Although you can't fool me or most smart people, do you think Judy will believe you? Harrison's eyes lit up as he finally understood. He said excitedly, Of course. I understand, teacher. When Judy wakes up, I'll tell her everything that happened tonight. This way, she'll definitely hate Joyce and won't bother with him anymore. Colin nodded approvingly. That's right. To us, Joyce is just a kid that we can easily manipulate. There's no need to ruin our reputation in order to frame him. Harrison finally understood what Colin meant, and immediately thanked him sincerely. Fortunately, teacher, you stopped me. Otherwise, if this matter really blew up, the royal family and the House of St. Hilda would send people to investigate. I'm afraid that would be really troublesome. Colin smiled faintly and leaned closer to Prince Harrison. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he said, "Don't worry. Furthermore, although we can't convict Joyce, we can still destroy him." Prince Harrison's eyes lit up, and he quickly asked, "Really? Teacher, what should we do?" To destroy a person, you don't have to convict him or destroy him physically. You can also start with his reputation. Reputation? Yes. Tonight's matter will definitely spread among the servants. They don't know what happened, but they must have guessed something. If you pretend to be indignant at this time and deliberately reveal some things. Plus, Joyce left Agate Manor overnight and fled back to Lion's Roar Castle. What do you think those servants will think of Joyce? Prince Harrison's face flushed with excitement, and he immediately said, "They will definitely think that you deliberately didn't pursue the matter in order to protect the House of St. Hilda's reputation. This way, Joyce won't be convicted, but he will also lose the chance to clear his name. Because you have already let him go, no one will investigate this matter thoroughly, and they won't be able to find the loopholes in the story. Even if Joyce wants to clear his name, he won't be able to do it." Colin nodded with satisfaction. He felt that Harrison's comprehension was not bad. Although he was still a little immature, he already had some qualities that an old silver should have. Perhaps this was hereditary. "You should know what to do next, right?" "I know, teacher." Prince Harrison nodded confidently. "Please don't worry, I won't let you down this time. It won't be long before Joyce's reputation becomes unbearably bad. He won't be able to get close to Judy anymore." Colin nodded with satisfaction and said, "All right, it's very late now. Go back and rest." Prince Harrison didn't leave. Instead, he nervously asked, "Teacher, then, can I go to the half-elven kingdom with you?" Colin smiled and nodded. "All right, I'll bring you along when I go to Silvermoon City." "Thank you, teacher," Harrison shouted excitedly. Then, he bowed and left happily. Looking at Harrison's bouncing back, Colin shook his head with a smile. He was still too immature. All his emotions were written all over his face. Colin didn't have much of a psychological burden to teach his students such dark things. Although Harrison was indeed young, he was destined not to be seen as an innocent child with his status. If Colin only told him Grimm's fairy tales all day long and imparted some righteous, honest, and fair values, that would really be harming him. After all, Harrison was destined not to be able to escape from the politics of deceit. Compared to a simple and happy childhood, he needed these schemes more. Furthermore, looking at his proficiency in framing Joyce, the Emperor and Empress probably didn't teach him that simple. As for Joyce, who was framed, Colin only felt a little guilty. However, if he really wanted to do it, he wouldn't be soft-hearted. After Harrison finished making up the story tomorrow, Colin would secretly add fuel to the fire and spread the news throughout the northern frontier, completely making Joyce die in society. Since this kid wasn't willing to be honest, he was no longer an underage child in Colin's eyes, let alone a brother-in-law. He was a political enemy that needed to be treated seriously. Furthermore, Colin was very clear that this political enemy had gathered a considerable force around him. Now, he had only gotten rid of the core of this force. There were still some branches and leaves that needed to be dealt with. Only then could he leave the northern frontier with peace of mind. At that thought, Colin looked in the direction of Winter City with a cold gaze. Chapter 357. Winter City. When the Earl of Avon walked into the dining hall in the morning light, he saw that Shalia had finished her breakfast and was wiping the corners of her mouth. "Good morning, Shalia. Why are you dressed so formally today?" Shalia was wearing a red off-the-shoulder dress today. Her hair was tied up high, and a sapphire necklace hung around her slender and fair neck. She looked elegant and beautiful. She smiled at the Earl of Avon and said, "Good morning, Evan. I'm going to visit the Duke of St. Hilda at the Lion's Roar Castle today." The Earl of Avon frowned slightly. Shalia saw this and immediately said, "I know you don't want to alarm the House of St. Hilda, but I don't want to continue searching without a clue. After all, this is the northern frontier. Without the help of the House of St. Hilda, we won't be able to find father's whereabouts. The Earl of Avon sat down at the long table. There was already a sumptuous breakfast on the table. He wrapped the napkin in front of his chest and said with a smile, "All right. Since you've already made up your mind, I'll accompany you later." Shalia was stunned. She thought that the Earl of Avon would refute her, but she didn't expect him to agree without saying anything. The Earl of Avon saw his fiancée's stunned expression and said with a smile, "But I still have to remind you that the House of St. Hilda might not be willing to help us. Besides, even if they are willing, they might not be able to track the whereabouts of a paladin." "I understand, but we have to try." Shalia pursed her lips with a determined gaze. The Earl of Avon stopped persuading her and began to enjoy the breakfast in front of him. Shalia didn't say anything else. She lowered her head and looked at the hollow patterns on the tablecloth, deep in thought. The dining hall regained its silence. Only the sound of knives and forks touching the plates could be heard. But not long after, this silence was interrupted by a series of footsteps. "My lord, there's a Knight Wilbur outside asking for an audience." The Earl of Avon frowned slightly. He hesitated for a moment, but still nodded to the attendant. "Invite him in and bring him to the living room. I'll be there in a moment." "Yes." Following that, Earl of Avon sped up and quickly finished the beef patty. After drinking a few mouthfuls of milk, he put down his knife and fork, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and said to Saria, "I'm sorry. I'll go see Knight Webb first, then I'll accompany you to the Lion's Roar Castle." Shalia smiled gently and nodded. "Okay." Earl of Avon got up and left the dining room. He quickly walked to the living room, but as soon as he entered, he was stunned. "Your Excellency." Knight Webb immediately stood up and saluted. At the same time, a short figure beside him also stood up and saluted. But the Earl of Avon stared at the short figure and frowned. "Young Master Joyce, you shouldn't have come to my place." The Earl of Avon's cold gaze and words made Joyce feel a little helpless. He opened his mouth and said with grievance, "Your Excellency, if I had other ways, I wouldn't have come to you." Knight Webb also hurriedly said, "Your Excellency, don't worry. We were very careful when we came out and didn't alert anyone. Also, they probably don't know that you live here, right?" The Earl of Avon sneered and sighed. "This is chilly Winter City. Do you really think that our every move can be hidden from Count Angeli?" But then he waved his hand and said helplessly, "Forget it. Since you're already here, tell me what happened." Joyce breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly recounted what had happened in the agate manor in full detail. He kept emphasizing that he was innocent and that everything was set up by Prince Harrison. The Earl of Avon listened quietly and sighed again. "Joyce, if you didn't run back to chilly Winter City overnight, you might have a chance to refute. But now, your behavior of running away will only confirm your guilty conscience, and then, wait for your reputation to be ruined." "WH. What? But I didn't do anything at all." "If that's the case, then why did you run?" the Earl of Avon asked coldly. But. Joyce opened his mouth wide and stuttered for a long time, but he couldn't say anything. The Earl of Avon could no longer hide the disappointment in his eyes. He knew that Joyce was now completely useless. Thus, he completely lost the desire to talk to Joyce and turned to leave. Joyce saw this and hurriedly walked a few steps to the Earl of Avon. He pulled his sleeve and begged, "Earl of Avon, you must help me think of a way. Don't worry, as long as I can marry Princess Judy, I will definitely repay your kindness." The Earl of Avon sneered and ignored Joyce, who was still daydreaming. He waved his sleeve and walked away in large strides. Joyce turned his head and looked at Knight Wilbur as if he had lost a loved one. However, Knight Wilbur was helpless at this time. The Earl of Avon's attitude was too firm, and Wilbur knew that no matter how he persuaded, it would be useless. At this time, he couldn't help but be disappointed in the third son of the Duke. Young Master Joyce, let's go back. Knight Wilbur could only lead the despondent Joyce back to the Lion's Roar Castle. After sending Joyce back to his room, Knight Webb was wondering if he should go find Arnold to discuss a plan. However, he saw a group of guards blocking his way. Knight Wilbur, Earl Angeli invites you in. Earl Angeli? Knight Wilbur's heart skipped a beat. He's back. Yes, Earl Angeli is waiting for you in the study. Please come in. Knight Wilbur suppressed the anxiety in his heart and entered the study surrounded by the guards. Please take a seat, Knight Wilbur. Colin seemed to be writing something. When he saw Wilbur enter, he looked up and casually ordered him. Colin's attitude was very friendly, which made Knight Wilbur feel relieved. He sat down on the sofa. After waiting for about 5 minutes, Colin finally finished writing and stood up slowly to Wilbur. Wilbur quickly stood up and asked respectfully, Earl Angeli, what can I do for you? Colin laughed and said, I've been busy recently, so I haven't asked you. Are you used to living in chilly Winter City? Of course, I was born here. I only moved to Imperial Dragon City when I was 8 years old. But from the bottom of my heart, I've always regarded myself as a Northern Frontier knight. Well, that's good. Colin seemed to be relieved. Then, he took out a golden dagger from his waist and handed it to Wilbur. Knight Wilbur took the dagger and asked curiously, Earl Angeli, what do you mean? Do you recognize this dagger? Yes. Wilbur nodded. This is the symbol of the Northern Frontier Guardian's authority. Colin smiled and said, as the Northern Frontier Guardian, do I have the right to order you, a Northern Frontier knight? Of course. That's good. The smile on Colin's face became brighter. I'll order you to cut off your left pinky. W.H. What? Knight Wilbur froze on the spot and looked at Colin in disbelief. However, Colin laughed and asked, didn't you hear me clearly? Do you need me to repeat it? Knight Wilbur's entire body turned cold as he realized that Colin wasn't joking. Why? Wilbur asked with difficulty. The smile on Colin's face did not change as he asked indifferently, don't you know the reason yourself? Wilbur opened his mouth, but couldn't say anything to refute. He had never thought that Colin's revenge would come so quickly and without any concealment. However, Wilbur realized that he couldn't resist at all. In terms of authority, as the guardian of the Northern Frontier, Colin did have the right to restrain Knight Wilbur. In terms of strength, Knight Wilbur clearly remembered that Colin had defeated him in one move back in Imperial Dragon City. Only then did he realize that he had no room to resist in front of this young count. With the golden dagger in his hand, it seemed that he could stab into the seemingly defenseless count's chest with a light stab. However, Knight Wilbur didn't dare. Knight Wilbur, do you have any doubts about my orders? The smile on Colin's face disappeared, and his tone became cold. Wilbur felt that he was immediately stared at by a terrifying gaze. He trembled from the bottom of his heart and didn't dare to delay any longer. He gritted his teeth and pulled out the golden dagger. Chi! Amidst a suppressed groan of pain, a severed finger landed on the white wool carpet. Dark red blood floated down like petals. Colin nodded in satisfaction. He personally picked up the severed finger and handed it to Wilbur. Send this severed finger to Consul Seabass and write down the reason for this matter yourself. Knight Wilbur covered the wound on his left hand tightly. His entire body trembled in pain, but he still replied respectfully. Yes. After that, Colin ignored him and sat back behind the desk. Knight Wilbur placed the blood-stained golden dagger on the corner of the table and bowed respectfully. Then, he left the study as if he was fleeing. You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.